Listen up. You're here because you want to know how to play Legend of the Five Rings. You know, that samurai fantasy RPG that has an amazing world. Did you read the book? I'm sure some of you are here because that chore is just too much. Your game master said they were running it, and you want to play but can't be bothered with a massive tome of rules. Others are here because they want to preview the rules to see if they even want to play. And the last of you, well, the last of you have my sympathies. You're the reason I'm making this video. You fellows read the book and noticed that the rules are just difficult to understand. I do not begrudge you. I've been running this game since 2018, and it still throws me for a loop. So for the curious, the lazy, and the befuddled, welcome to the L5R Dojo. Today, we'll be talking about some of the basics. Dice, rings, and skills. These three things are inherently intertwined, so it's difficult to talk about one without discussing the others. Still, we have to start somewhere, and of the three, I think the dice are our best bet. Look at these beauties. I know what you're thinking. What are those strange symbols on each side? Do you think they're neat? Would you rather have numbers? Well, too bad. First, notice that there's two types of dice. A D6 called a ring die and a D12 called a skill die. When you roll these, you roll a number of ring dice equal to your ring and a number of skill dice equal to your skill. There are 4 unique symbols you can find on every die. This first symbol is the most important. This is a straight up Zen circle, the foundational symbol of Zen Buddhism. When this symbol appears on your die, you can keep a success. Successes are the core of the game. When a character wants to accomplish a task, the player needs an amount of successes equal to the target number, or TN. I'll be calling target numbers TNs from here on out. Any number of kept successes less than the TN results in a failure of the task. If the player has a number of kept successes equal to their TN, they will succeed at their task. If they have more successes than their TN, they may gain extra effects. Be aware that sometimes these effects are for each bonus success, or for every 2 or 3 bonus successes. And not every roll will benefit from bonus successes, so be aware of this when it comes time to keep your dice. TNs in L5R tend to be low, with a TN of 1 being easy, a TN of 2 being average, and a TN of 3 being difficult. But they go all the way up. And depending on how a character approaches a task, the TN can change. The next symbol will probably become your best friend. This is the karmic wheel of rebirth, the Dharma of Zen Buddhism. But here in L5R, it's your explosive success. Explosive successes are excellent because when you keep one, not only does it count as a success, but you may roll another die and keep it as well, if you wish. So even if the TN is greater than the number of dice you roll or keep, you always have a chance of succeeding. The only caveat is you have to keep the dice before you roll additional ones. But more on what that means later. Just keep that in mind for now. This guy looks like a little swirling drain, but I like to see it as everything coming together. And that's exactly what happens when you keep this symbol. This is an opportunity. When you keep an opportunity, something extra happens. Exactly what this extra thing is depends on the circumstances of the roll, which can include technique, approach, and action type. What does that all mean? Well, as I said, it's hard to explain dice without explaining rings and skills. Just hold on to that nugget. We'll get there. I promise. But first, it's time for Criticism Corner! Yay! You didn't think I'd go an entire video without complaining about something. I've got to let out my evil side once in a while and show you what's wrong, and this is my first great opportunity. Get it? Because I'm talking about opportunities? Yeah, you get it, you're smart. If you watch my other videos, you know I am not a fan of opportunity, and I'll quickly reiterate why. Every time a player rolls a die, they're going to want to check every chart every technique they have for the perfect way to spend that opportunity. And with every new book, there's a chance for a new table of new opportunities. So with every die roll, the game could come to a crashing halt as players try to optimize their opportunities. What you gonna do? This mechanic is so core to the rules, you can't easily ignore it. Sometimes, if you're a clever GM, you can streamline it here and there. But, of course, that comes at the expense of players determining the outcomes of their own rolls, which can lead to players feeling robbed of an effect they want. So, either the game slows down and you got a bunch of players waiting on somebody to look through all the books, or you got a player feeling cheated. It's a catch-22. I hate it. I wish it was changed. We'll have to wait for next edition. All right, let's get out of this. Whew. Back to teaching you about L5R. Where was I? Oh yeah, the last symbol. This little W. Actually, it's not a W at all. Instead, it's supposed to be a cherry blossom petal. Do you see it? I mean, I guess? What's weirder is what it symbolizes. Strife. Strife is basically stress. I'll talk about strife in more detail in the next video, but here, just know that while the book says strife isn't inherently bad, the effects of having too much strife are lower die rolls and unmasking, causing losses of honor and glory. All things that are, kind of important. If you keep a die that has a strife symbol, you'll gain a point of strife. Why would you want to keep a die with a strife symbol? Because strife always piggybacks on more useful symbols. I'm sure you've noticed by now I use the word keep and kept over and over again when talking about dice. That's because this game uses a roll and keep system. When you roll your dice, you don't simply add them all up like other games. Instead, you have to pick and choose which dice you think will give you the best chance in the game. This means you might pick more opportunity over successes, or maybe don't take that extra success because you can't afford any more strife. The way you use your dice can be very strategic, giving you short-term and long-term risks and benefits. But how many dice can you keep? Well, that's up to your rings, and there's no better time to talk about rings than right now. So what are rings? Well, they're right there in the title. Look, there they are! Legend of the Five Rings! And there's all these little symbols. They're right there. Legend of the Five Rings gets its name from the Book of the Five Rings by both legendary and historical boy Musashi Miyamoto. I'm sure the Japanese love me calling him a boy. But he's my boy! It's basically a how-to guide on swordsmanship for samurai. Each chapter in the book is named after a classical element with the addition of void as the fifth element. That's right, void. Not heart. Not Bruce Willis. Void. It's everything and nothing, a source of the spirit. So it's more like this. In the game, elements are reimagined as fundamental building blocks of reality, meaning that every character is also composed of these five rings. Instead of your traditional attributes of strength, intelligence, and charisma, you got earth, wind, and fire. But what is earth? Is earth my nose itching? Is that what earth is?
It's when you pick your nose.
Here is where we run into our first tricky thing about this game, where you have to step out of a traditional game and think differently. Rings aren't about how physically strong you are, or how numerically speedy you are, or even what your exact IQ score is. A ring is all about your process. If you study the Japanese language, you'll often see the suffix do on words. For example, kendo, the way of the sword; judo, the gentle way; aikido, the way of being one with ki energy; and bushido, the way of the samurai. Do you see a theme here? The way is a perfect tool to understand what rings are and how to use them. They're a gauge of how comfortable a character is with a certain way of thinking and doing. I'm going to give you an example here. Ken is trying to convince the judge to let him into a street fighting tournament. He starts by deciding exactly how he's going to convince the judge. In L5R, this is called your approach. He sees several ways to approach the situation. First, he could reason with the judge, stating that he's an alum that has been in many street fighting tournaments already. Reasoning is an Earth-style approach, and he would use that ring in his role. Alternatively, he could bribe the judge into letting him in. This form of trickery would be an air approach. Another way would be to charm the judge, perhaps by building a rapport with him over their common love of fighting styles. Charm is a water approach. Ken could also cry foul, stating that his senpai Ryu was allowed in, so it would be unfair to exclude him. This approach attempts to incite an emotional reaction and falls into the fire ring. Lastly, Ken could quote his old master, saying that the fighting spirit begins with a single spark, and that he wishes to prove that he is that spark. To fall back on enlightenment is the essence of void. When used socially, you can see your rings use more of a measure of your personality. Are you more charming or scheming? More analytical or feeling? But rings are not just social. They have a physical side, a practical side, even a magical side. It's all dependent on the skill you're using. So let's get into skills. If you want something that resembles traditional RPGs you've played, you can't go wrong with skills. They are what it says on the tin. You want to hit a guy with your sword? Martial arts melee. You want to play your musical instruments? Performance. But we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what each skill does. Instead, we need to take a look at skill groups. Every skill can be put into one of 5 skill groups: artisan, social, scholar, martial, or trade. This chart here basically tells you what goes where. But what we really want to zero in on is this final column way over there. This is the approach. You see here that your rings interact with each skill group differently. For example, if you want to put a torn note back together so you can read it again, you should use Composition Earth. If you're interacting with a new poison and trying to figure out whether it's deadly or not, you would use Medicine Fire. I'd like to point out that this list of skills does not have any sort of investigation skill on it. In other games, if you want to gain some sort of information, you can just roll investigation to find a clue. Well, as any Sherlock Holmes fan can tell you, investigation isn't its own skill, but rather the combined knowledge of many different fields. If someone wants to know something about a strange letter, well, they better know something about composition. And if they want to know what kind of weapon would make a specific mark, well, they'd use martial arts melee. Here's another time where you should be asking an important question. If I'm using martial arts melee to investigate, well, the martial skill group's approaches make no sense. What do? It's okay. If a skill is used in a different or novel way, you can shift around the skill group approaches until you find one that matches the intended use of the skill. Just keep the rings the same and use the ring for that approach. Some of you can inherently see the advantages and versatility of this system, but for others, this isn't enough. You need to know just how strong your character is. How else would you be able to describe them? Well, here's the beauty. You can describe them however you want. You don't have to rely on a stat to be big or small or pretty or ugly. This is a game where the small guy can beat a big one just by having a better approach. You can outthink and outmaneuver your opponent with your way, your own dough. Now, let's put everything together. Dice, rings, skills. Remember, these dice, these black 6-sided dice, have more strife on them. These white 12-sided dice have less strife on them. When you make a check, you roll a number of ring dice equal to the appropriate ring for your approach, and a number of skill dice equal to your skill. You create your dice pool and roll. You re-roll any dice your special abilities allow, and then keep a number of dice up to the ring you used. But you must keep at least one. Then you roll an extra die for every explosive success you kept. Then you have the option to keep the new die. If that one is an explosive success, you keep it and then it explodes again, and so on until you stop rolling and keeping exploding dice. Next, you tally up all your strife, and you log it on your character sheet. Then you spend your opportunities and finally tally up all of your successes together to see if you've accomplished your task. Let's get back to our example of Ken. Ken wants to enter the street fighting tournament. So he decides to talk to the judge. This is his declared intention. Next, he has to determine the details, or more accurately, choose a skill in his approach. The GM states that the proper skill is a courtesy check. As a fiery guy, he decides he's going to berate the judge with how unfair things are until he gets his way. The GM states that this approach is difficult to pull off, so the TN will be 3. What the GM doesn't say is that a more reasoned approach would have been TN1, and all other approaches are TN2. Ken has unknowingly picked the hardest approach. It's now time to assemble his dice. As stated before, for obvious reasons, Ken is pretty fiery, and his firing is a 3. But he hasn't learned much in the way of courtesy and only has a skill of 1. This gives him 3 black dice and 1 white die. He rolls them and gets this result. Next, he is allowed to modify these dice if he has any special ability that allows him to do so. He doesn't. So we're going to move on. Now he must decide which dice to keep. Since his ring is 3, he can keep up to 3 dice. He decides to keep all of his dice except for the one with strife on it. He hasn't made his TN yet, but there's an explosive success which will give him an extra die. And he hopes that will give him the success he needs. Now we'll resolve the dice, starting with the explosive successes. He rolls and boom! A success paired with a strife. Now he gets to choose if he wants to keep that die or not. While a strife isn't something great to have, he'll take it for now because he really needs that success. Next thing he does is record the added strife on his character sheet. Then we come to the last two, opportunity and total successes. Look, the book says to resolve opportunity first, but many times spending opportunity is dependent on whether or not your roll was successful. In my experience, you should just use your judgment on which to resolve these first and second. I usually resolve opportunity second in my games, just because it works better for me. Ken's opportunity is used to make the judge cower and stress out. The judge gains 2 strife. Finally, we total up all of Ken's successes and explosive successes. And, hey, they equal the end of the roll. The judge backs down and lets Ken enter the tournament. Now, I bet this seems like a lot to put together, but in practice, it works much more smoothly. The tournament is full? That's unfair. Ryu gets to fight, so should I. I go to the judge and give him a piece of my mind. Okay, make a courtesy check. I'm pretty heated, so I'm going to use my fire ring. The judge is trained to be cool with hotheads like you, so it's going to be a difficult roll. TN3. Right, I keep 3 of these. And an explosive success. I get to roll another die. Before you roll, just tell me what you're keeping. This success, an opportunity as well. Okay, what's your new die? It's a success with strife. Yes, I'm keeping it. Okay, record your strife. The judge, he's gonna back down a little and let you enter the competition. All right, and just to shove it in his face, I'm using the opportunity to give him 2 strife. He gets a bit anxious around you now. This might help you out during your bouts. And there you have it. It took quite a while, but we made it through the basics of Legend of the Five Rings. We learned how to use rings and skills, what an approach is, and how to read dice. Oh, and the steps of making a check. Hello, and welcome to the L5R Dojo, where we ask the question, will I complete this series or get bored and stop halfway through? I'm your lecturer, Sensei Corey. Today, we'll be talking about derived attributes like endurance, focus, and void points. Remember to bow before you enter, and let's begin. Water, earth, fire, air, void. This isn't just the intro to The Last Airbender, but the core attributes of the game. These are your rings. But we already know all about those. What we need to talk about today are those secondary attributes. These are important aspects of your character that are either derived from your rings or inform you about how your character interacts with society. We're going to divide these two up by that aspect, derived attributes and social attributes. Today's lesson, derived attributes. Derived attributes are attributes that are dependent on other attributes, like rings. I've said this before. You can't explicitly spend your experience to make them better, but you can raise the rings that they're based on. You have 5 derived attributes. Endurance, composure, focus, vigilance, void points. Yeah. Are void points derived attributes? It's not in the same section. I think they are. They're dependent on your void ring. Come on, people. Keep up. Endurance and fatigue points. To calculate your character's endurance, add the character's earth and fire rings and multiply the result by 2. Easy peasy. The book says endurance represents a character's stamina, but that's a huge freaking lie. All they are your character's hit points. Here are the basics. Character 1 performs and succeeds at a strike action. Character 2 defends by taking an amount of fatigue points equal to the weapon's damage. Fatigue points are a representation of the amount of energy expended to dodge or deflect the attack. No one is actually hit, just like hit points in D&D. If fatigue points are greater than a character's endurance, that character becomes incapacitated. In this way, endurance is a threshold. Exceed a threshold and you move through it, activating its effect, which in this case is becoming incapacitated. There are a bunch of ways to get rid of fatigue. All of them are listed right here. But I'm going to talk about a few standouts. When a scene or encounter ends, a character reduces their fatigue until it is equal to half their endurance. This shows the de-escalation of tension in a scene and the ability to allow a character to recover normally. If their fatigue is already less than half their endurance, nothing happens. A character can also sleep off their fatigue. After a night's rest, a character may remove fatigue equal to twice their water ring. I really have a bunch of gripes about endurance and fatigue point mechanics, but I'm going to hold off until we talk about combat proper in a later episode, because I want you to have the full context for my gripe. Instead, let's try to make an honest woman out of L5R with a new segment called Strictly Off the Book, see? That's right, we're going to throw the book away and dive right into homebrew territory. As I just stated, fatigue are exclusively used as a damage mechanic. But since the book states that endurance is also tied to stamina, I think, it'd be well suited as a cost for actions, or maybe a consequence for actions. For example, if a PC wants to climb the 1,000 steps to an ancient temple, you could assign them maybe 2 fatigue to perform the journey. If they need to lift a large boulder, or perform a day's work in the field, or any number of strenuous tasks, there could be a fatigue cost associated with each of those tasks, to show the general wear to one's endurance. This is using it as a cost. It's the simpler way to assign fatigue. The more complex way would be use fatigue as a consequence. Let me give you an example of that. A gate is crashing down, threatening to trap the PCs in a room. But Matsu Tsukasa has an idea. She's going to get under the gate and hold it open. The GM states this is a fitness check with a TN of only 1, but says she will gain 7 fatigue from holding the gate open. For every bonus success, she can reduce the fatigue by 1. The GM also states she must make this check every round to continue holding up the heavy gate. If she takes more fatigue than she has endurance, she will be rendered incapacitated and crushed under the gate. This type of mechanic can be used for long, strenuous tasks as well, such as swimming, running, or hard labor, where bonus successes reduce the amount of fatigue gained from the activity. I'd like to warn everyone, like all homebrew rules, these might upset the balance of a game, either by increasing the difficulty, bogging the game down with more rules, or just generally being unnecessary to a game whose focus is elsewhere. Make sure all your players understand your new rules before the game starts, and always lead with having fun. Let's get back on book and talk about composure. Composure and strife. To calculate your character's composure, add the character's earth and water rings, multiply the result by 2. Just like endurance is the threshold for fatigue points, composure is the threshold for strife points. We talked about strife a bit in the last video, but now we are going to really dig into the topic. As we know, strife points are a character's level of stress, and a character can gain strife by keeping dice with the strife symbol on them. What I didn't tell you is there are other ways you can gain strife. Is your character afraid of spiders? Oh, there's a spider, gain some strife. Is your character upset that an encounter didn't go their way? Gain strife. Did your character want to do something fun but wasn't able to? Gain strife. Do you have to fulfill an order that you disagree with? That's right, you're gaining strife. Finally, if a player is feeling frustrated or down, it can be reflected in their character by assigning some strife. Huh. It's a really cool mechanic, and it's probably my favorite thing about L5R. So, what does all this strife do? There's a saying attributed to the Japanese. Everyone has three faces. The first face is the face you show to the world. The second face is the face you show to those who you love. The third face is hidden to all as the truest reflection of yourself. It's not a Japanese saying. It's totally made up. But forget all that right now. Today, right here, it's a Japanese proverb. Just pretend with me, alright? It'll make this much more poignant if you do so. In L5R, every character has a face they show to the world, a facade of a dignified samurai, a metaphorical mask they wear, or in the Scorpion's case, an actual literal mask that they wear. As a character's strife begins to reach their composure, fissures in that mask begin to manifest. Perhaps the character begins to sweat or stutter. Maybe they begin to become anxious or angry. These are little tells. The dam hasn't broken yet. Then, the character's strife exceeds their composure. They're now barely holding it together. At this point, they become compromised. A compromised character's vigilance becomes one, as they become emotionally distracted. Additionally, and more importantly, a character can no longer keep dice that show a strife symbol. This makes it far less likely for a character to do any task. This effect persists until a character's strife is equal to or less than their composure again. Fortunately, there are many ways to remove strife. Unfortunately, sleeping it off isn't one of them. Over here is a complete list, but let's again talk about a few key ways. At the end of every scene, a character is allowed to calm down and reduce their strife to half of the character's composure. If it's already less than half, nothing happens. A character can indulge in their passion advantage. Doing something that they love will remove 3 strife. What do you love to do to unwind? Sort your L5R cards? Oh, I have so many. What am I even doing? In my own games, I like to reduce strife through other universally relaxing activities, like resting in a hot spring or having a really good fancy meal, or taking in a kabuki show. But that's my own rule. Lastly, and most importantly, a character can unmask. Unmasking is a quick way to unload all of a character's strife. Unmasking is when all pretenses of a character fade away and an ugly truth about them is revealed. Their third face. A character can unmask at any time to remove all of their strife. They don't need to be compromised to unmask, but they can only do it once per scene. A character cannot continue to unmask over and over again to gain its benefit. Every character has their own way of unmasking, and each has their own consequence. For example, a character may unmask by bending their principles. This means they have to take an action that is underhanded and will lose them honor. While unmasking doesn't explicitly take an action in the rulebook, most unmasking needs a specific action to occur, like doing something underhanded. Every GM can handle unmasking differently, but I like to get a bit brutal with it. If you unmask in a rage, then you better do something either stupidly violent or unconscionably violent. Yeah, I want to see you punch a wall till you bleed, or instead of attacking with your sword, just straight up bite your opponent because you're angry. The biggest problem with unmasking is that to unmask is to humiliate yourself in some way. And for some players, they just can't bring their badass character to do that. It's a feat of roleplay. It's a feat of acting. Be kind to your players if they can't do it, but reward great role-playing if you can with maybe extra experience points or a void point. That said, sometimes There are ways to unmask positively. Being unfettered by the shackles of polite society can give a character the freedom to do things they couldn't before. No matter if the unmasking is done for a positive purpose, there's always a societal consequence for the action, either in honor, glory, or both. One of the worst unmaskings is panicked retreat. To use this, a PC must flee from the scene. That's it. They're gone. They abandon their friends in the middle of whatever they were dealing with. It's probably the most brutal one of all, as it not only hurts the PC, but the whole group. I've changed this in my game to 1 round of retreating for the character, so they're not totally boned. But every GM should do what they think is right for their game. Focus. Focus is just your firing plus your erring. That's pretty much it. You don't have to worry about, those order of operations here. Focus is basically your initiative modifier. It's usually a tactics roll, and then you add your focus to the number of kept successes. That number, that's your initiative. What focus isn't is your character's will to stay on task. Look, as I explain stuff in this game, there will be many poorly used words to describe things. Endurance, focus. That's just the start of them. You have to go with it, okay? If I were writing this game, I would have called this attribute reaction. Sure, it's generally more descriptive, but I'm not a game writer, I'm not a game designer, so, what the hell do I know? That's sarcasm if you can't tell. Focus can serve another purpose for game mastering. For NPCs, it can be used as a threshold for success. For example, if a player needs a number of successful rounds to succeed, also called momentum points, then an NPC's focus value sets the threshold for the number of momentum points needed. Vigilance. Vigilance is air, water, divide the result by 2. This is always going to be a bit lower than other attributes, but that's okay. Vigilance has several uses. First, it can be used instead of focus when calculating initiative, if the player is being caught off guard. This will naturally lower their initiative, so the person getting the jump on them will almost always go first. But if a PC is lucky, maybe, they'll get the jump on their stealthy assailant. Next, vigilance can be used as the TN to get past a PC or NPC. This can be done with a courtesy or command, or like any social skill. It can also be used for stealth or sleight of hand, that kind of stuff. Many adventures will say something like, any PC with a vigilance of 4 or more will see money changing hands, or something to that effect, to clue PCs on details others would miss. If you're familiar with the concept of passive perception from D&D, that's basically what vigilance is, but it can also be used for social as well as physical deception. Void points. Let's talk about void points. These things go by many different names in many different games. Hero points, drama points, or my favorite and the original version of them, force points, from the old West End game Star Wars RPG. The mechanic is very similar in each game. You spend your point, you get an additional die to add to your roll. They give you that extra oomph to succeed at difficult rolls. Very basically, in the game world, it's your character's key energy or inner strength coming to bear, but it can manifest in many different ways, spurred on by not only their inner drive, but need to protect their friends, devotion to their lord, or even just stubbornness to survive. When you spend void for an extra die, you do so when you assemble your dice pool. This means you spend void before your roll, not after. Your dice pool then gains an extra ring die, and additionally, you may keep an extra die as well. If you think of this as your ring increasing by 1 for just this one roll, well, I think you'll be fine. There are a few other ways to spend void as well. As a source of key energy, it will also be used to power some special abilities, most notably Kiho, those mystic powers of monks. But it might be used with any ability, from kata to spells to school techniques. Void points can be used to save a character from blows or jump in the way of blows. When a character takes a critical strike, we'll discuss critical strikes in more depth in a future video, but just know that a critical strike is a wounding blow, from a scratch all the way up to beheading. This is different from fatigue points, as these are actual wounds. I think the phrase critical strike is a bit of a misnomer, but that's what it's called. Again, I can't argue with game designers. So when a character takes a critical strike, they can spend a void to perform a shattering parry. After they roll dice to resist the effects of a critical strike, they may spend a void point to re-roll their resist check. This will also damage the weapon they're using, or if it's already damaged, destroy it. The rules also state that this can be done unarmed, but that might cause a player to gain a permanent injury disadvantage, which is one of the effects of a critical strike. So, you're doing the exact thing you're trying to avoid. Fortunately, it says this is GM's discretion, so do what you think is right for your game. Void can also be used in the opposite way as well, letting your opponent purposefully wound you. Let me explain how this happens in a little more detail. When a character successfully strikes, the target of the attack defends by taking fatigue points equal to the weapon's damage, and dodge and parry the blow. This happens automatically as the body naturally tries to defend itself, but a PC can force its character's body to stay still and take the blow. But the force of will needed to do so requires a void point. This means a character will receive no fatigue points and instead receive a critical strike. Mind you, if an attack already does a critical strike, and that character spends a void point to be purposefully hit, then that character takes 2 critical strikes. This is one of the few ways critical strikes may stack. So, void can be very useful, but how in the heck do you get void points? The book states at the start of the game, the PCs have an amount of void points equal to half their void ring. What this means is up to interpretation, I guess. Do they mean at the start of the first game session? At the start of every game session? At the start of every new game adventure or chapter? I have no idea. My suggestion is that you give this out at the start of every new adventure, every new chapter, or every new act of your game. If a GM decides to go with the absolute letter of the book and starts you with half, and then that's it for the rest of the character's life, well, don't worry. There are plenty of ways to gain void points. First off, as an incentive to get people to play their disadvantage. Every time they do, they'll gain a void point. Because as a GM, I have to control the world, all the NPCs, and you expect me to know what's on everybody's character sheet and disadvantages? Dude, play your own disadvantage. You get a reward now. If the GM conceals the TN of a roll, the player gets a void point. When it's time for a GM to assign the TN, he'll instead say that the player doesn't know. A GM may do this because he thinks it's impossible to know how hard a certain task might be, or because the GM wants to make things mysterious or challenging. This definitely messes with how a player interprets his role. A player that doesn't know how many successes they'll need will probably try and keep more than they need just to make sure, eschewing opportunities. As a condolence, that player gains a void point. Lastly, if a GM throws in a complication, which is basically an unexpected plot point that comes from character-driven stuff, they'll gain a void point. Look forward to a full breakdown on complications when I do a video about game mastering. There is one final way I like to give out void points, but it's strictly off the books. Put that slate back up again real quick, do it. Yeah, strictly off the book, see? I like to use void points as a reward for players who do their due diligence. A player that moves the plot forward in an interesting way, they get a void point. If they remember key details from a game session weeks ago, I think that deserves a void point. A really great roleplay moment, I'll give out a void point. A funny joke that makes everyone laugh, no void for you. Look, I've been in games where the GM gives out hero points for a really funny joke, but as soon as people see that, the game devolves into everyone trying to outdo each other with bad puns, derailing the entire game. I love good jokes once in a while, but they're their own reward. Let's get back on book. However you give them out, there's a maximum limit to the amount of void points a PC can have at any given time. To keep players from hoarding their points, the maximum amount of void points they can have is equal to their void ring. Easy, right? So I hope we all learned a thing or two about derived attributes. I'm sure everyone has questions, and I'll try to answer them all in the comments. Speaking of the comments, I got a correction from my last video on the Dead Unicorn Discord server. I think I'll address it in my new segment, The Void in My Head. It's quite spacious in there. Lion Mane quite correctly pointed out to me that Aikido is, well, spelled very wrong. The way I spelled it here, it would be the way of autumn, which isn't so bad. You know, sometimes I turn beautiful colors before losing all of my foliage. It's just nature. Also, I'd like to make a clarification about opportunity I thought I should have made in the previous video, but it escaped my mind. When spending opportunity, you can only use an effect once, unless it has a little plus sign next to it. For example, when using opportunity on Water Stance to remove 2 strife, you cannot do it twice to remove 4 strife. But when using opportunity to negate strife from the roll you just made, you can spend as many opportunity as you like. A very important clarification. If you have a correction, let me know in the comments, and if I think it has merit, you'll be sure to see it next video. Welcome to the L5R Dojo, where the YouTube algorithm will trap me into making L5R videos for the rest of my life. I'm Sensei Corey, and today we're going to be talking about honor, glory, and status. Remember to keep your cubby clean, your eyes off your neighbor's paper, and let's begin. We're going to keep it to the basics here, guys. Honor, glory, and status, or HOGS, as stated in the book. Look it up. There are 3 social attributes that give a rating from 0 to 100. The higher the stat, the better it is. A character will gain and lose points in these stats due to their actions in the game, and not through spending experience points. The first number, here, is called your rank. For example, if you have a 63, then your rank is 6. This will be how HOGS is pretty much used for almost everything. Some abilities will give bonuses based on your rank in these stats. The starting point for your HOGS is not determined by shoving as much experience into them as you can, like some sort of weird HOGS turduncan, but instead by how you were born, where you grew up, and who your parents were. That's right, it's nature versus nurture time. During character creation, depending on the choices you make, you'll be awarded a starting honor, glory, and status. For example, if you were born into the Heta family of the crab and became a scout, you'd start with an honor of 35, a glory of 40, and a status of 30. But if you were born a lion of the Akoto family and became a Shugenja, you'd have an honor of 50, a glory of 44, and a status of 35. Pick the right combo and you can have high scores in all of these, if you think that's important. And that's the question. Are they important? What do they do? Let's talk about that. Honor is a rating of how good a person you are. It's based on a romanticized version of samurai chivalry called Bushido. It's made up of 7 tenets, but I'm not going to go through all of them today. If you want me to do an in-depth video on Bushido, please give me a comment below. But in the meantime, it generally means you do good things and you gain honor. You do bad things, you lose honor. In fact, if your character has a very high honor, they gain virtue advantages that show their devotion to Bushido. And if they have a very low honor, they get flaw disadvantages that show their inability to be nice to others. Here's where some clever boys start writing in the comments, actually, it's more nuanced than that, and some unethical actions can actually gain you honor. Oh, aren't you special? Yeah, it's true. The culture of Rokugan and the definitions in Bushido can be interpreted in different ways. And you can play a character who purposefully skirts this to gain honor in a skeezy way. And yes, as a GM, you can put players in a situation where doing the ethical thing might lose them honor. In fact, this adventure right here is all about that concept. Know that this is the exception rather than the rule, and if you're looking to play a clever boy, I'd make sure you hash it out with your GM as what kind of things you can actually get away with. Bushido can be interpreted differently by your GM than what you think it is, and you don't want to have that argument in the middle of a game. Glory is your reputation. Do cool things, people will talk about you. That's kind of it, but not really. If your glory starts to go below 40, you'll be known as well, but for inglorious actions. That's right, in this game, if you are incompetent or do terrible things, your glory will go down. In fact, if you have a very low glory, you'll get infamy disadvantages that show how people generally distrust you. Naturally, if you have high glory, you'll gain some fame advantages. The book specifically states that glory is best described as how much the outside world, especially one's lord, believes the character is a proper samurai. But let's get this straight. There are no rules where spreading terrible rumors or ne'er-do-wells whispering in your lord's ear will lose a character glory. Loss of glory is only a voluntary thing, or at worst, part of a choice between two bad options where loss of glory is one of them. Status is a character's station in life, their job and their responsibilities. The more important your job, the higher your status. A person in data entry may have a low status, while middle management has a higher status, and so forth until you get to the person with the highest status, the CEO or president. This is basically the gist. It is a little more complicated by the fact that characters in other clans can't tell you what to do. Just as if you work for Dell, you don't have to do anything the Apple CEO tells you to do. But that doesn't mean you don't respect the Apple CEO. And you probably listen to his advice about your company more than you would someone at the Apple Genius Bar. Status is different than honor and glory in that you can only gain it by getting titles. Basically, by being promoted. You only lose it by being demoted or staking your status. The highest status, 100, is held by the Emperor, as they are the absolute authority in Rokugan. Only the gods can tell him what to do. Gaining and losing glory follows this little chart right here. As a GM, you determine the impact of the action, and then the PC gains or loses accordingly. You might notice that on the losing side it says to lose equal to your rank. This is because those with higher honor or higher glory fall faster because of expectation. Look, if Tom Hanks suddenly starts making fun of disabled people, we'd all be shocked. As opposed to Donald Trump, where that's expected. Did I get too political for you? Grow up. This doesn't work in reverse. So if an adventurer tells you that your PC gains an amount of glory or honor equal to their rank for doing an action, like this adventurer does here, don't listen to it. Instead, use the chart. Before a character loses points in hogs, the GM is supposed to warn the character, hey, if you do that, you'll lose some points. And then the PC needs to make a choice. If the action they're about to take is worth losing some points, or if they want to do something different. Now, I'm not a fan of this. And when I'm about to criticize something, I go to the criticism corner. Yay! Look, I get it. You want to warn a player if they're doing something bad. This is especially true for players you might not know as well. For example, if you're playing with new people at a convention, this lets people understand your playstyle a bit better and what you think are good and bad actions. Now let me tell you what's wrong with all of this. When you make a decision and you forget about the ethics of it, or you do something because you think the ends justify the means, does God come down from on high and warn you before you do it? No, you just do it and you take the consequences. And you either keep doing it or you learn not to do it. Having the GM tell you specifically the consequences for your actions is kibitzing. No other action does the GM stop the game and tell you what the consequences are. This is the spice of life, baby! Also, it can make the GM seem controlling. Every time a player wants to do something, the GM can interrupt and say, oh, you'll lose glory and you'll lose honor, just to keep a player from doing something they might otherwise want to do. I don't know about you, but I don't like it when my GM tries to talk me out of an action. I don't want to hear, are you sure? I'll roll the dice on what I want to, thank you. Ugh, enough of that. We need to talk about staking your hogs. You can leverage your honor, glory, or status to convince someone to trust you. This can be anything from getting someone to believe your story, borrowing something, or telling them that you'll get the job done. How it works is that the player will stake an amount of points of the GM's determination and what conditions the stake is lost. There's a handy chart for this in the freaking errata? Okay, just go online and print it out. Or, just follow your heart and make it up as you go along. You're the game master. You get to make the rules on this, right? Lastly, a PC or NPC can make a check to determine another player's honor, glory, or status. The book says check page 170 on the art of investigation. And when you get there, there's absolutely nothing there on how to specifically check one's hogs. Okay, alright. Nothing in the errata either. I suppose it wants the GM again to follow their heart and come up with a skill check that they think works. If only we could come up with some rules that would help out a game master. Strictly off the books, see? Welcome to Off the Books, where everything is an optional homebrew. As with all of this kind of stuff, it might throw off the balance of a game, either mechanically or thematically. As the GM, it's up to you to determine what rules fit your game best. First up, the art of investigation and hogs. This should be pretty easy. Glory should be a culture check, as knowing famous and infamous people is part of knowing your culture. Status should be a government check for obvious reasons, and honor should be a sentiment check as you scrutinize a character's character. Set the base TN at the target's vigilance, but add some modifiers based on circumstances. For example, if a character has fame or infamy traits, lower the TN for knowing that character's glory or status by 1 for each. If it goes to 0, I just assume that everybody just automatically knows who that person is. It's obvious. Honor is a little different, especially if someone is actively trying to hide their honor. If someone is doing that, change the check to a contested one, sentiment versus courtesy. Now I'd like to change tack a bit and talk about glory as a measure of fame. As they say, fame is fleeting. Some people only get their 5 minutes and then are forgotten forever. Previous versions of L5R had rules that if you didn't continue to do great actions, your glory would ebb away. I'd like to propose something similar, but something simple. For example, for every week a character did not earn glory, they lose 1 point. This continues until they die or retire, in which case their glory becomes locked in the history books. Until, they come back out of retirement or come back to life, which isn't unheard of. I think that's it for honor, glory, and status. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings of arrow of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. And scene. Welcome to the Legend of the Five Rings Dojo. I'm Corey, and today we're going full theater kid on you. Or thespian, if you're nasty. If you played your share of RPGs, you might notice there are more than a few similarities between it and certain kinds of theater. There's even a game called Mind's Eye Theater, Vampire, if you ever done one of those. So, are RPGs a type of theater? Look, you're going to think I'm full of myself here when I give you the answer, but yes! Yes, it certainly is. If role-playing games are theater, then you can break it down into acts and scenes, and L5R does just that. A scene in a play is an event bound together by either location, time, and/or theme. So too is it in Legend of the Five Rings, with one added ingredient: the rules. Hey, before I go on, I'm going to change. Do y'all mind? We'll do it in 3 seconds. 1, 2, whew. That's better, man. That ascot is hot, let me tell you. All right, where was I? Yeah, there are 3 types of scenes: narrative, downtime, and conflict. Each have their own feel, and some have some special rules to them. Sometimes scenes, they blend together, or they can stack on top of each other. They can get messy. Let's go into the anatomy of each scene, starting with
narrative scenes.
Unless all you care about is combat, you'll probably spend most of your game here. A narrative scene is an unstructured event where the PC can move around their environment, poking at stuff and talking to people. It's not the place when you're in a conflict with others, and it's not the behind-the-scenes stuff, but rather the place where you're moving the story forward. Narrative scenes have 2 purposes. 1, to explore your own character and the world around you, giving the game grounding and depth. Narrative scenes are where most of the roleplay happens in a role-playing game. The Game Master gets to give sweeping descriptions of locales and characters. Players get the chance to ham up their characters, showing off their personalities and their quirks. In the same sense, a narrative scene could be when a player simply shares his character's inner thoughts to the table, as his character meditates peacefully. Anything that can further character growth and connection is an important scene in any RPG. And number 2, to give the characters motivation. Give the exposition and move that plot forward. These are critical scenes in an RPG, when a lord gives their PCs their marching orders, or the PCs are caught up in an investigation, they're putting the clues together, figuring out puzzles, negotiating with NPCs. Even scenes of physical exertion can fall into this category. For example, climbing up a sheer cliff or navigating a tightrope in order to get to the next objective.
Tightrope, but not tightrope.
I said type. It's not. It's a tightrope.
Yeah, you did.
I
You put a P in that.
did not tightrope. Scenes are normally structured affairs with obvious beginnings and ends. This is not always the case, though. For example, a town celebration could be a single scene, or it could be broken down into littler scenes. For example, the parade and the award ceremony. Both interpretations here are correct. The only difference is how a character loses fatigue and strife. We've gone over this before, but here's a refresher. The idea behind this is a character has sufficient time to cool down once a scene has ended, or the pressure of the current scene has passed, allowing a character to regain their strength. If these conditions are not met, a GM might want to consider the next part to be part of the same scene, even if it takes place at a different locale or has a different theme. When a scene transitions without a break, for example, when a combat breaks out in the middle of your narrative scene, characters do not recover. In fact, any ability that lasts until the end of the scene do not end simply because a combat breaks out. This is considered the same scene, even though the scene type has changed. In my experience, most of the time my players don't even realize a scene has ended, and they forget to reduce their fatigue and their strife. A signifier may be in order so your players can understand one scene has ended and another begins. I love that old acting trope. And scene.
Downtime scenes.
Let's relax with a little R&R and enjoy our downtime. Downtime, strictly speaking, is when you're not working. And in L5R, downtime scenes are scenes in between the other scenes. This is where time can pass more swiftly. When players aren't doing things that need that play-by-play action, you're doing a downtime. This isn't to say downtime isn't important. Significant events can happen in downtime, but there's little to no roleplay during the downtime scene. Downtime scenes do have a few things that are important to note about them. There's usually some bookkeeping aspect to downtime. The easy example of this is if the PCs sleep, then a new day starts, and the characters can heal some fatigue or even wounds. It is probably the most used downtime scene, followed closely by traveling. When traveling, note should be taken on how much supplies are used and how much distance is traveled in any given time frame. There are many other types of downtime scenes. If a character is indulging their passion, crafting an object, performing a stakeout, any time when it's necessary to just skip time forward quickly. There are also actions that can be used in downtime, including techniques. For example, the cleansing rite is a downtime activity. There's a problem here that arises from timescale though. When an ability is a downtime activity, it never states how long that activity lasts. The book does note that not all downtime activities are the same length, and some cannot be accomplished if the time frame is too small. But is an hour too small of a time for a cleansing rite? 2 hours? This also clashes with the rules on long downtime scenes, in which it recommends one downtime activity for every 2 days of non-events. Does this mean a cleansing ritual takes 2 days? Downtime scenes can also be the time between adventures, when one story arc is complete and the characters have a couple months before the next big story starts, which gives them time to return for training or pursue their own personal goals. Success or failure in any task during this time should be dependent on as few of rolls of the dice as possible, as to not bog down the game or simply forego any rolling and just narrate what happens in this time. I even let my players choose exactly what happens to them. I mean, we're all having fun here, right?
Conflict scenes.
When people are at odds, more than likely you'll want to turn your scene into a conflict scene. These are highly structured scenes with lots of rules to keep fairness. There are 4 kinds of conflict scenes. Intrigues are social conflicts. This can be tense negotiations or a party where political tensions are high. I want to state right out, I don't like intrigue scenes. I think they are much better served as narrative scenes with a looser structure. But L5R has them, and I will be going over them and how they work and why I don't think they do. Duels are one-on-one fights. They're highly ritualized and can be used from anything from sword dueling to playing games of chance. Skirmishes are your normal combat. It's your group of PCs versus a group of baddies. Finally, there are mass battles, where players take control of large armies and pit them against each other, or the GM's army. All conflict scenes use a rule called structured time, meaning that conflicts have rounds, turns, and actions to let all players know who is acting and what they can do when it's their turn to act. A round is a piece of time in which all participants in the scenes, PCs and NPCs alike, gain an opportunity to act. The order in which they act is called initiative. And yes, even intrigue scenes use initiative. If a player was prepared for the conflict, they use their focus as a base value for their initiative. If they were caught unawares, they use their vigilance. Each conflict type has its own skill used for initiative. If they succeed at this roll, they add 1 to their initiative plus 1 for every bonus success. Initiative is rolled only once at the start of a conflict, and stances cannot be used for this roll. Any ring can be used, but that ring will determine a character's starting stance once the conflict begins. The character with the highest initiative value goes first, then the next, and so on until the last character in the scene has an opportunity to act. Then the round resets back to the top. Some things to remember about initiative. The initial TN can be modified by wounds or if a character arrives late. If a character does not make their TN, they don't add anything to their focus or vigilance. That is the only downside. A character does not lose their action from failing an initiative roll. When it is your character's opportunity to act, it is called their turn. During a player's turn, they can basically do 2 things. The first is to set their stance, and the second is to perform an action. Stances is how a character carries themselves in a conflict. Are they defensive? Cautious? Aggressive? There are 5 stances in total, each corresponding to a different ring. Each stance has a different benefit to them. Also, when performing an action, the ring of that action must correspond to the ring of the stance that the character is on. If a person is attacking on fire stance, then they have to use their fire ring on that roll. This can pigeonhole some strategies. For example, if a character wishes to cast an Earth spell or invocation, they must be on Earth stance, even if it might be more advantageous to be on Water stance this round. When on Earth stance and other characters make either an attack action or a scheme action against you, they cannot spend opportunity to inflict critical strikes or conditions. This is a mess of a rule. With most players, they're going to be scratching their heads, wondering just what they can actually spend their opportunity on. Can they use an opportunity to give a character on Earth stance strife? My table had an argument about it. There was an earthquake, and now the PCs are dazed. One PC states they cannot be dazed because they're on Earth stance. But the earthquake didn't make a roll to make the effect happen. There was no opportunity spent. Is this a fair way to rule? These kinds of sticky situations plague Earth stance. Water stance gives your character an extra action, as long as that extra action, 1, does not share the same action type, and 2, does not require a roll. This stance is useful when a character wants to do things like draw a weapon and attack in the same turn. Remember, you cannot use this stance to attack twice,
Or move twice, or draw 2 weapons.
Sometimes this makes sense, like attacking twice seems overpowered for a stance, but drawing 2 weapons is something I let my players do on Water stance because it's unsatisfying for players to have to wait a full round to draw both their swords. Remember, RPGs are supposed to be fun, so you have to balance what the rules specifically state with the flow and the feel of your own game. One of the biggest frustrations is the aid action, because it's an attack, a scheme, and a support action. This means you can't pull out an item and aid another in the same round, even on Water stance, because pulling out an item is a support action. This is just frustrating, and it's a bit nuts. So be careful with Water stance and what you allow and what you don't. Fire stance allows you to add additional bonus successes to your roll for every strife symbol kept. But only, and I cannot stress this enough, only if you already succeed at your roll. This essentially means your character can have a lot of added effect to a roll, but at the cost of their sanity. Air stance increases the TN of any action targeting you by 1. If your character's school rank is 4 or higher, then the TN increases by 2 instead.
I'm not sure how this works for any NPC, since school ranks are not listed on NPC sheets. Do I just guess if they have school rank at 4 or higher? Do they mean conflict or intrigue rank? The book keeps these secrets to itself.
Void stance is great. The best stance mechanically speaking, and has a pretty cool benefit. If you keep any dice with a strife symbol on them, you don't generate strife from that die. You can still gain strife from other sources, such as like a fear effect, and keeping dice with strife can still activate other effects, like the dreaded spiritual backlash. I have to say, I do like the idea of stances, but as they are now, the rules can be confusing and restrictive, and they can only be used in conflict scenes. The last thing we need to talk about are actions. Every turn, each player may take 1 action, with a bunch of exceptions. But most of the time, 1 action. You have to choose between attacking, or moving, or drawing an item, or using a technique. There are 4 types of actions: attack, movement, support, and scheme. A note, the book does reference intrigue actions from time to time. This is an error. All intrigue actions are, in fact, scheme actions. Most actions a player take will specifically state what kind of action it is. For example, pulling out or stowing an item is a movement action. Wait, no, it's a support action. I'm wrong, guys. That's my bad. So I guess that one is a bad example. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. Talking and manipulation actions are scheme. Walking around, that's movement. Bolstering yourself and others is support action. And giving someone a good whack is an attack. These action types really don't have much of an impact on the game, and are just keywords that other effects work off of. For example, if your character becomes dazed, they have higher TNs for some attack and scheme actions. Some actions have more than one type associated with them. In this case, any effect that uses any of those keywords apply. It's not telling you to pick one type of action it could be. It's talking! Why do I need initiative for talking? And why do I need to make like 50 freaking rolls to do anything? It takes too long. It's just garbage. I hate it! Ah! People want that rage. People want it.
They want to see the drama.
They want to see the drama. Welcome to the L5R Dojo. I'm Corey. Come in, take a seat, and don't speak unless it's your turn to, because today we're covering intrigues. L5R has its own rule set for social encounters where two or more parties wish to achieve a social end. I will be going over how to conduct an intrigue scene, and then I'll talk a bit about why these types of scenes are unnecessary. Look, L5R is written by many talented people, and I will be taking them to task. Everyone has wins and losses, and as a reviewer, I have to point them out. So, if you're a writer, rules maker, or just a fan of L5R and think I'm being unfair, just know that that's not my intention. I can only give opinions that I have, and while I may be bombastic as a YouTuber, none of this is personal. You got that, you moron? It's not personal.
Momentum.
Intrigue scenes use a rule called momentum. This is a way of having a single task require multiple rolls. For example, if you want to forge a sword, your GM can give it a difficulty value of 3, meaning to complete the sword they would need 3 successful smithing rolls. In intrigue scenes, this means every point of momentum gained brings a character closer to their social goal, usually by wearing down their opponent.
I'm wearing you down, baby.
Much like how combat works, where a single roll seldom brings down an opponent, each attack wears down your opponent, giving them fatigue and wounds until either you or your opponent falls. Just replace fatigue with momentum for intrigue scenes, and you got yourself a fair approximation.
Social objectives.
The book states that intrigues should be used when there are a large number of characters. Otherwise, a narrative scene should suffice. This is actually in direct conflict with how intrigue scenes are presented in officially produced adventures, like Winter's Embrace and
The Scroll or the Blade.
In those adventures, the PCs participate in intrigue scenes with a single opponent NPC. So, it's really up to the GM to decide if any scene needs to be an intrigue or not. Before anyone rolls initiative, and yes, you will be rolling initiative, a social objective needs to be set. In fact, when someone actually has a specific objective in mind for any scene, you can transform that scene into an intrigue. This seems to be the actual way intrigues are created in official adventures. Each character, PC and NPC alike, chooses a social objective. Players can confer with each other before they choose their objective. When more than one character chooses the same objective, they can support each other in accomplishing it. The book isn't specific on what this support looks like. If everyone has the same goal, do they all use the assist action? Or does each character roll separately for their momentum points and just pool them together? Maybe both is acceptable, but the book doesn't actually specify. The GM also assigns social objectives to NPCs as well. Those can be kept secret, and the PCs can try to discover those during play. In fact, some PCs may also want to keep their goals a secret as well from the other PCs. So, pass a note to your game master. The first thing your players will want to know when an intrigue starts is, what kind of social objectives can I have? Even the player that started the scene with a specific goal in mind will want this information just to see if they want to change that goal. The book has several suggestions, and if you're using an adventure, there's usually a new social objective there specific to the adventure circumstances. The GM or player can come up with their own social objective they find fitting, but the Game Master needs to determine the difficulty value for those objectives. If your objective targets a specific individual, such as making an appeal to them, discrediting them, or discerning their qualities, the difficulty value is usually the target's focus value. This can be modified due to circumstances. For example, if the target is sleepy, or they're already predisposed to hate the PCs. If the objective has no specific target, the GM just uses their best judgment on a difficulty value. Couple of notes. Unmasking during these events can make a character instantly lose an intrigue. When one character is attempting to appeal to another character and they are discredited first, this can end the intrigue right then and there. Lastly, spreading rumors is an objective a character can take. During an intrigue, a character can work the room and spread a piece of information, whether it's true or not. You're not trying to convince the person the rumor is true, you're just trying to get it out into the world. This doesn't seem like a thing that should be done during an intrigue where people are trying to do, specific tasks. Rumor mongering to me seems like a downtime action where you talk to different groups during a long period of time. But it's not. It's here at Intrigue.
Initiative.
After choosing social objectives, every character rolls initiative.
Greetings! It's a pleasure to meet you.
Then, ignore the initiative value you just rolled, as players can take actions in any order, unless two or more actions overlap or are at odds. Then the character with the highest status goes first. You can preempt this action if both your initiative score is higher and you lose 1 point of honor and glory for a breach of etiquette. I'm not sure why initiative is even a thing here. Why don't things just go in status order then? And if any character wishes, they can forfeit a number of honor and glory. Seems like an equally good way to me. In fact, I have never had my PCs roll initiative for an intrigue scene, and every scene has gone off as well as an intrigue scene can.
Turns and actions.
Just like all conflicts, intrigues are broken down into rounds and turns. A round in an intrigue doesn't have a set amount of time it takes. This is because it's full of banter, so a round can take as much time as you want it to take. The core rules state that an intrigue lasts as many rounds as needed to determine success or failure. But every official adventure gives a set number of rounds for their intrigues. For example, in Winter's Embrace, the first intrigue scene, running a tea ceremony, says it lasts for 3 rounds. At the beginning of a character's turn, they will set their stance as normal. Stances may be physical posture, but it's mostly their rhetoric and their poise. Since it also dictates the ring they use in any action, it could also be the tact the character takes. Their approach. A character also gets a free move during their turn. They can move pretty much anywhere in the scene, so they can get in range of all of their actions and techniques. Moving in this way is not considered an action, so a character can move and perform an action each turn. After a character sets their stance and determines how they move, then they get to take one of 4 actions: assist, calming breath, persuade, or a unique action. Unique action. So that's like every other action. So you can take any action, and anything. You can take anything. Assist, calming breath, and unique action can all be performed in intrigues, duels, and skirmishes. I'm going to go over them here in detail, and in later videos, they'll just hang out in the sidebar over here. Wait, is the sidebar over here? Is it over there? Is this the sidebar? Assist is an attack, scheme, and support action where you help a character with their task at range 0 to 2. If you are unskilled in the task, the character you are assisting gains just a bonus ring die to their dice pool, and if you are skilled, they gain a bonus skill die. They are also able to keep an extra die on their assisted rolls no matter what, just because you're assisting. The player must describe how they are assisting, and the GM can veto any assist action that doesn't seem sufficiently justified. Calming breath is a support action that helps with recovery. It allows a character to remove 1 fatigue if their fatigue is over half their endurance, and remove 1 strife if their strife is over half their composure. This is an and thing, so they get to do both.
While I was editing this, I noticed something. In intrigue scenes, rounds take as long as they need to. So, if one person is over here doing a, 2 or 3 minute persuade action and you're taking a calming breath, you're doing this to regain fatigue and strife. In an intrigue, it's usually going to be strife, but that takes a second to do. You could take a lot of calming breaths during that time period while that guy's over there talking and talking and talking and talking. It's just a weird thing. Like, it works better in combat where people are fighting and then you take a breath as your action. But yeah, it just doesn't work in Intrigue. The timing doesn't work. It's weird, and it's just another flaw in the system.
The unique actions are a catch-all. The PC describes what they want to do, and the GM determines what kind of action it is and what the TN is if a roll is needed. Unique actions can also be techniques like school techniques, Kiho, invocation, and especially Shuji. Many Shuji are made specifically for intrigues. Shuji can also modify rolls or give extra options for spending opportunities and bonus successes, as if, your list for using opportunities wasn't large enough. Now we get to the bread and butter of intrigues, Persuade. Persuade is the chief way a player gains momentum points. When a character succeeds in a Persuade check, they gain 1 momentum point, and then they can gain extra momentum points for every 2 bonus successes. The TN of the roll is based on the target's vigilance, and it can be modified by which skill is used to persuade. That's right. Not only does this check have an approach, but the player also has the choice of skills. If a character uses the command skill, the TN of the roll is reduced by 1 against characters that have a lower status rank than them, due to the fact that it's easier to command those of a lower station. If they use courtesy, the TN is reduced by 1 against characters with a higher status rank, because, you're supposed to brown nose them. And if a character uses games, performance, or any other skill, then the TN is reduced by 1 for characters of equal rank. The book says you use diversions away from the affair to persuade, which to me is strange, but I can see it as trying to make connections through shared interests and using that to persuade someone through friendship. These roles can be further modified by an NPC's demeanor and the circumstances of the scene. Speaking of the circumstances of the scene, I bet you're wondering, with all this initiative rolling, deciding of actions, making even more rolls every round for momentum, where's all the role-playing in this social scene? When do I talk?
You will address this court as judge or your honor, and you will not address this court until...
You will not address this court.
Well, that's an interesting question. The book states that a GM can give out RP bonuses to TNs or even give out bonus momentum. This seems to insinuate that before any action, there's a bit of a role play that happens that justifies the action. If a player is using command to persuade, they should roleplay that, either through description or by speaking as your character. Then, after your character gains a success or failure, that should be roleplayed as well. This can seem like you're roleplaying by piecemeal, doing a tiny bit of RP, then making a roll, then doing a tiny bit of RP again before the next player's turn. But I'm gonna talk more on that later.
Resolution.
When a character or group of characters gain momentum points equal to or more than their difficulty value, they have completed their goal. This is usually a time when the Game Master will wrap up the intrigue with the results. But an intrigue scene can persist, especially if you're running an official adventure that has a set amount of rounds. If this is the case, players that have just completed an objective can just choose another one. If the completed goal was to discredit someone, then that person gains enough strife to become compromised. Then they can either unmask, causing them shame, and possibly their goal if they were trying to appeal, or they can retire from the scene, which also causes them to lose. But wait, isn't retiring from the scene the same as unmasking as a retreat? What's the difference between retiring and retreating? Also, the rules don't specifically state that the character must unmask or retreat, just that those are options for being compromised. There are actually 2 more options. That is, to take a calming breath, which takes your character immediately out of their compromised state, or to just remain compromised and take the penalty. This basically gives the victory condition of discrediting someone no teeth. And I think that the spirit of the rule means to make them unmask or retire. At least, that's how I run it. If the goal was to appeal to a person or group, then that person or group takes your perspective. It's kind of like mind control. Isn't that neat? If someone with higher status than you completes an appeal, then your appeal is overridden, and they get the mind control instead. If your social objective was to discern someone's qualities, then you get to choose 3 aspects of that character you wish to know about. And finally, if you're spreading a rumor, then that rumor is spread. You did it. If the objective was something special to the adventure, then those rules should be stated in the adventure, and if it was something that the players created, then the GM gets to dictate the results. Courts of Stone notes that any failed intrigue should still have a narrative result that moves the story forward. Like, failing up. Remember to move the story forward in a way that places more hurdles in front of the PCs, but it does give them a way to continue. With that, we're done discussing the rules. If you think I missed something, give me a comment. But in the meantime, I'm going to discuss why I don't like these rules in a segment I like to call Criticism Corner! Yay! We spent a good long time telling you how intrigues work, and now I'm going to tell you why they don't. First off, let me say that I'm not in the camp of people that says there shouldn't be any rules for social interactions in RPGs. There definitely should. But it needs to complement a game system, not impede it. And here, it definitely impedes gameplay. Imagine this. You're in the middle of a conversation with an NPC. We introduce ourselves, have small talk, we're getting down to business, and now you begin to persuade, and suddenly, instead of having to make a single roll, you now have to roll initiative and take a stance. Then, every round you have to continue to persuade, making roll after roll. This gets frustrating real fast, as you already set up the circumstances through RP to persuade anyways. Then, of course, with each roll, there are techniques to use, opportunities to spend. Then you have to continually come up with more and more things to say every round, more and more RP for the same topic you already hashed out before the GM ever decided that this was an intrigue. This is also complicated by the fact that you're stopping your RP. All the momentum in your argument is now deflated as you have to roll initiative, come up with an objective, make rolls every round in between tiny bits of RP. This leads to disjointed conversations that have a good possibility of making no sense if you cut out all the rolling bits and splice them together and like you're editing a video. Or even worse, your players stop talking as their characters and instead just describe what they say in third person. This is terrible because it makes the game less cinematic, less epic. It draws everyone out of it. As I said, the core rules state that intrigue should be for large, complicated scenes. But that's not how they're used in official adventures. They use it for events that pit the party against one person or just one unified group. The only exception I've seen to this so far is in the Kamari scene in
The Scroll or the Blade,
where there were 3 distinctive sides. Mind you, this is so far as of when I'm recording this, so things may change in the future. So what do you do instead? Well, I find the best ways to persuade in RPGs is to find out what a character wants and what their goals are. This doesn't mean you're always blackmailing a person or bullying their allegiance. It could just mean you're being friends with them. You have camaraderie through shared interests. Skill rolls should be used to get an NPC to talk about themselves, open up, rather than, mind control. You win your roll, so now the NPC does exactly what you say? That's always been a stupid rule in any RPG, and even stupider because it can be leveled against a PC too. Now, you've forced your players into doing something they don't want and are probably having a bad time because of it. What if you don't have time to get to know a person before you persuade them? Well, L5R already has a handy rule for that. Remember staking your hogs? Yeah, you can simply stake an amount of honor, glory, or status to get a person to trust you to complete a task. I mean, why is this even a rule when you can just use an intrigue scene to mind control a person to believing you? Staking your hogs is a vastly superior rule to intrigue scenes. I bet you're wondering how I do intimidation, because, doesn't that also work like mind control? Well, in most games, yeah. Do this or else, and roll a successful intimidation, and that can get an NPC to do what you want. So, how do we change this to become more fair? A choice and a rules consequence for not doing that intended action. For example, if you want to intimidate a person to drop their weapon, first you must succeed on the roll. Then the target gets a choice. Either they drop their weapon or they take an amount of strife. Now, instead of a player being forced to do something, they're weighing the consequences of not doing that thing. And the choice is ultimately theirs. Now, I've heard this argument quite a bit. Social scenes, like intrigues, help people new to RPGs. Or it gets Wallflowers a place to RP where other players might overrun the table with their talk. I don't think rules-heavy social scenes actually help in this situation. Instead of opening a player up, now they're just going through a mountain of rules they have to learn instead. I think if there are problems at the table in social RP, it's a better tack to stop the game and talk about how everyone at the table can make the game more fun, especially if there's a table hog. Still, if intrigue scenes are the solution, then they should be optional, not a standard rule. But as it is now, intrigues are baked into this version of L5R. And it's supported with techniques, making them hard to ignore. Intrigue rules are a terrible addition to L5R, and if you can avoid them, I would. I hope future editions take them out or replaces them with something a little more simple and free-flowing that complements the action instead of stopping it, and forcing players to do repetitive rolls or forcibly changing their mind. Welcome to the Legend of the Five Rings Dojo. I'm Corey. Come on in. Make yourself at home. I know it's dark in here, so be careful coming in. Oh geez, okay. That was irreplaceable. Are you okay? As we head into duels and skirmishes, we have to talk about two specific actions that are quite complicated: movement and strikes. Today we cover movement. You might be asking, can such a small topic like movement be enough for an entire video? Well, just look at that time code. Yeah. Moving in Rokugan has a mind's eye feel to it. This means there are no miniatures, there are no board. They tried to make it easy to see the battle in your mind. Note I said tried, because while it does work most of the time, it can break down in a few key situations. But I'm getting ahead of myself as usual. When you're playing the game, you can simply say you want to move to a place and the Game Master tells you if you can or you can't. If the Game Master says you can, boom, you're there, easy peasy. If the Game Master tells you you can't, it's usually followed up by some sort of reason. There's an obstacle that keeps you from moving there. This obstacle can be anything from being tied down, to being too fat to get to that location, to the location being guarded, or the location in question has been vaporized into a fine mist. Weird stuff can happen in RPGs. If the player character can overcome the obstacle, then they can move to their desired location. These are the rules that are most notably followed during narrative and downtime scenes, but also intrigue scenes, and to a lesser extent, duels and mass battles. Where we are most concerned is skirmishes, where movement is much more constrained. A skirmish is a conflict scene where there are more than two combatants involved in a physical altercation. This is your basic battle in an RPG. Everyone rolls initiative, and in turn order, every player moves and then attacks an opponent, blah 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 blah. Because skirmishes are extremely tactical, positioning, terrain, and range are important, so movement becomes exacting.
Range bands.
Before we get to talking about how we move, we have to have a way to measure distance. In L5R, we don't use meters or feet, but instead use an abstract quality called a range band. One range band equals something, some such or other. Sometimes it's one sword's width from your opponent. Other times it's the length of 2 horses or more. It just depends on the situation. Because of the strange nature of range bands, you must always explain a range band in relation to something else. For example, you cannot say a room is 3 range bands long, but you can say that your character is 3 range bands away from a door. This is important for setting the stage for combat. When a player asks how far away they are from an enemy, you can say something like range 4, but the boss, he's further back at range 5. This can give players an idea in their head of the spatial relationships between characters without large numbers like 10 or 20 yards, or doing complex math in their heads like, your enemy is 25 yards away and I move 30 feet, how many rounds until I close distance? Still, it does become problematic not to have at least an idea of what a range band is, and Fantasy Flight gives us this handy chart right here. Notice that range bands get larger in a more or less exponential way. Again, this is an attempt to simplify things, i.e. archery is range 4, so any character in that range band can be hit by your character's arrows. Never mind the fact that the standard bow, the Yumi, has a range of 2 to 5. How does this work in practice? Well, I'll try to set the stage of a skirmish. The lion and crab burst through the door to confront the Oni and the 4 zombies. Sneaking in through the window, the scorpion decides to take a more cautious approach. Both the crab and the lion are within 2 to 3 range bands of the shambling corpses, while the Oni sits on a throne of bone at the range of 4. The window is a bit closer, at range 3 to the Oni, but is still 2 range bands from the zombies. They're more towards the center of the room. Did I paint a good mental picture? Can you see the placement of all the characters and objects in your mind? Does it look sort of like this? Now, the crab and the lion move 2 range bands forward to meet the zombies and bring their range to the zombies down to 0. Does this mean they're now at range 2 with the Oni, or is the Oni still at range 4? I described the Oni behind the zombies, right? You'd think moving towards the zombies would also reduce the number of range bands to the Oni, but since range bands are exponential, closing range bands with the zombies isn't enough distance to reduce the range to the Oni at all. If you're a player and would like to call bullshit on this rule, well, I feel you, brother. But just for the sake of argument, let's say the crab moved 2 range bands to meet the zombies, but the lion moved 2 range bands towards the Oni. Wouldn't this mean the lion somehow moved farther than the crab? He just passed all those zombies right on by to get within striking distance of the Oni. Weird, huh? Now let's add another level of difficulty to this. Instead of 4 zombies, now there are 12. Some are at range 2, some are at range 3, and some are even behind the Oni in reserve at range 4 and 5. Can you keep all that in your head? What if there are 5 players instead of 3? Pulling out a piece of paper and jotting down some lines and numbers can help, of course, but if you're doing that, you might as well go back to good old maps and miniatures. Thankfully, the book has rules for that, but more on that later.
Maneuvers.
Once per turn in skirmishes, before or after your action, your character may move a single range band. As I said before, a range band is in relation to something, so you have to move one range band towards or away from a person or object. You may think it seems weird that moving from range band 6 to 5 covers more ground than from 3 to 2, but the book explains this by the pressure of combat. Quote, "This reflects the difficulty inherent in closing with or escaping a foe while allowing characters to reposition strategically when not being impeded." It might make more sense then, following this logic, that movement must be in relation to the nearest enemy, or the nearest enemy in the direction the PC is traveling. This interpretation would fix the problem that you could just bolt past enemies to get at the farthest enemy, even though the rules don't specifically forbid it. This does make range bands a bit goofy when moving towards an object. Does the object pressure you to move slower when you're approaching it? Would it be weird if all the runners of a race were to slow down as they approach the finish line, like some parody of Achilles and the Tortoise? There's a joke there for all you philosophy majors. Like in every game, there are ways to move farther. Many techniques have built-in ways of moving, but the main way is the maneuver action. Any character can take a maneuver action, following the standard rules of taking actions. But that said, this is one of the most complicated rules in the game. Maneuvers do two things. First, it allows one more range band of movement. Secondly, as an option, you can make a fitness roll, using the ring of your current stance at TN2. If you succeed, you move another additional range band, and then one more on top of that for each 2 bonus successes. The question is, why wouldn't you want to make that fitness check? The answer? Water Stance. Water Stance allows a character to take an additional action as long as that action does not have the same action type, and, more importantly, does not require a check. Since Maneuver's fitness check is optional, not required, a character can take that as their second action, as long as they don't make the optional check for extra movement. Now I know what you're about to say. Water Stance doesn't say you can't make the check, only that you can't take an action with a required check. This is a rules lawyer statement if I ever heard one. You and I both know the spirit of Water Stance rule is that a character cannot make a second check. That said, there's no clarification in the errata, and if you're a really nice GM, I suppose you could allow it, but that means the NPCs get to do the same thing, so maybe you're not so nice after all.
Hey guys, it's After the Fact me. I missed something in the main rules again, and I'm going to take a little second to fill you in on 2 things that are important to movement. One is mounts, and you can use these rules, I guess, for like dogs or anything that's running on 4 legs. And, of course, disabled people who have lost a leg. So first off, the skill you use when doing horsemanship checks is survival, and you can replace any fitness check with survival when on horseback. Secondly, when you succeed at a movement action, you get to add bonus successes equal to the creature's water ring. Lastly, if you're on a mount, they can go double the normal rate in downtime and narrative scenes. If your character has lost a leg or has a maimed leg, anything that like impedes movement that way, there's the lost leg disadvantage. It does one of 2 things. First off, if you're in a narrative downtime scene, all movement takes double. Secondly, if you are making a check that is movement related with the water ring, you have to re-roll 2 of your successful dice. So that should cover anything for people on crutches or even wheelchairs.
Tactical maps.
Mobs, spacing, moving quicker at longer ranges, all of this weirdness of mind's eye movement are solved by tactical maps. The only problem? You have to have maps and miniatures. There are drawbacks to maps and minis. For example, it makes the game feel more like a board game, more structured rather than a role-playing experience. And it also costs money. If you like tactical maps, or you're having trouble with the standard movement rules, I do recommend the optional range bands on a tactical grid rule. First, we need to convert ranges for weapons from range bands to boxes or hexes. On page 266, there's this handy guide showing how many squares or hexes each range band consists of. This is only for calculating range of weapons, not for movement. Remember, range 0 is the square or hex the character currently is in. Movement is converted by taking each range band of movement and making it a flat 3 squares or hexes. Look, I'm not going to call them squares of movement. That's stupid terminology, especially since I love hexes, like all great GMs do.
You know, hexagons are the bestagons.
Instead, I'm going to call them movement points. For every 1 range band of movement, you get 3 movement points. that can move you 1 square hex per movement point. There is no extra movement for being farther away. If a character can move more than 1 range band in a round, a character can combine all of their movement points from all of those sources when making their move. If you're using squares, moving diagonally takes an additional movement point, which can stack with other movement penalties. But you're a smart GM that uses hexes, so don't worry about this. Exiting any square hex that is considered difficult terrain costs 1 more movement point. Difficult terrain consists of any space that contains an enemy, i.e. range 0. Is entangling terrain, or other wacky circumstances like moving vertically. Each source stacks with the other, so moving out of an enemy space while knee-deep in mud in a diagonal direction costs 4 movement points. If a character does not have enough movement points to make a legal move, they must either change their movement or end it there. Movement points not used by the end of the turn are lost.
Terrain.
Naturally, the area a character is in can change the dynamic of any scene, from the rocking of a boat, fighting in brambles, fog, or the depths of the Shadowlands. Terrain is also measured in range bands from a certain point. I guess every GM should have some sort of physical marker to which terrain stems from, something unmovable so it can always be referenced. For example, going back to our heroes against the Oni, there could be broken glass extending 2 range bands in front of the Throne of Bone, making it dangerous terrain there. Don't tell the PCs this. All terrain is a secret. The only way to know about it is if the player spends an opportunity on initiative, or accidentally steps into it. So that area on fire over there, players don't know it's dangerous terrain unless they spend opportunity to know.
That's right, it's another stupid rule from L5R. Obvious terrain features should be, obvious. People should know them at the beginning of the scene. The opportunity should only be useful if there is something hidden or easily overlooked.
Here is a list of terrain from the core rules. I'm sure you can think of more and add them to your game. You can stack terrain as well, making a foggy swamp be both obscuring and entangling. It also recommends you make locales for fights exciting by adding terrain features, but not to get too bogged down stating, quote,
Keep in mind, however, that combat in L5R is meant to be narrative and quick. The presence or absence of terrain features is more important than their exact position down to the inch.
Really, L5R? Quick. This is the first of 5 videos on combat. Just covering the basics. I can't with you right. I'm leaving. Dangerous terrain are any hazard that can give damage. Intense heat, cold, building is on fire, thorny brambles, broken glass. Any character in the terrain will take physical damage, i.e. fatigue, equal to the number of dice they keep with strife symbols on any check they make. So, what if they don't perform a check? Well, I guess the terrain doesn't hurt them? Yeah. That's weird. Defiled terrain is basically unhallowed or cursed terrain. Stuff of the Shadowlands. This doesn't have any real impact on a scene, but rather, any scene where a character is in defiled terrain, at the end of it, they must make a TN2 fitness or meditation check, and if they fail, they become afflicted, which is the first step to becoming tainted. Characters already tainted reduce the TN by 1 because they're used to it. It's like, it's their bath. Remember, if a character is carrying a sacred item on them, that item becomes damaged instead of the character becoming afflicted. Entangling terrain is anything that slows you down. Mud, deep snow, hedges, skating rinks. All it does is increase the TN of moving and movement actions by 2. If you're using map-based combat, it uses up an extra movement point. I think we covered this. Hollowed terrain is the inverse of defiled. Usually it's temples, but it could be around portals to the afterlife or other realms, the convergence of ley lines. Are there ley lines in Rokugan? The homes of fairies? Oh yeah, there are definitely fairies. The GM picks 1 or more ring they think is important to that location. Meditation and theology TNs using those rings are decreased by 1. Conversely, tainted characters have their TNs increased by 1, or by 2 if they're using the rings in question, when, and only when, they are resisting effects. Imbalanced terrain is when the kami go wild, doing things they don't normally do. Or if they leave an area, making it hard to do things with those kami. A barren field or a raging storm or any chaotic natural event could be attributed to an imbalanced terrain. The GM again picks one or more rings. Meditation and theology TNs are now increased by 1 when using that ring.
Also, otherworldly beings like dragons and ghosts have their TNs to resist effects increased by 1, or by 2 if they're using that specified ring. As an aside, I'd also like to point out published adventures like the Oni's Mask and Sin of Regret have added effects to imbalanced terrain. For example, an imbalanced air terrain might have gale-forced winds the PCs must also fight against.
Obscuring terrain is anything that's hard to see through. Fog, bushes, a clown in a storm drain, anything hiding just off screen. Ah! You could even use it for combat involving those cool scenes of fighting shadows against paper screens. I love those. All attack checks against characters in obscuring terrain have their TNs increased by 1. I'd probably extend this to objects too in case someone needs to destroy an evil statue in the fog. Any character or object further than 2 range bands from another character inside obscuring terrain cannot be seen by that character. If your character is within 2 range bands of the edge of obscuring terrain, you can see out of it just fine. So you can hide inside obscuring terrain to watch others safely. That's it for moving. It's here. It's time. Today we talk about combat! That was a lot. I'm lightheaded. I'm Corey, and welcome to the L5R Dojo, where we go through the rules of Legend of the Five Rings, the RPG. Today, we're parsing out combat, specifically the attack action, most notably related to strikes. These actions are mostly used in duels and skirmishes, but you really can interrupt any scene with the face punches if you want. RPGs are all about agency. We got a lot to cover, so let's dive right in with
Silhouette.
It's how big you are. Here's the chart. That's it. Seriously. Next topic.
Weapons.
Weapons are the tools you use to inflict pain. They can be melee.
Melee.
They can be
Melee.
weapons like swords, ranged weapons like bows, or unarmed attack like fists. Each weapon type has its own skill, so be sure you have training in the type of weapon your character prefers to use. If you wish to make an attack, the first thing you need to do is find out if you are within range of your opponent. If your opponent is outside that range, you can't attack them. And yes, melee and unarmed attack have ranges associated with them. There are rules for attacking outside of a weapon's given range, but that character must have access to an opportunity that allows them to do so, usually given through a technique. This allows the character to attack, but if they don't hit both the TN and have opportunity enough to attack at the new range, the attack fails. Weapons also have 2 damaging attributes, damage and deadliness. Damage, against all logic and definition of words, do not wound opponents. Instead, damage is the base number of fatigue a given weapon gives an opponent on a successful strike, or most other attack actions. Deadliness is the number you use when you do the actual wounding damage to an opponent, called a critical strike. Crafted weapons like swords and bows also have grips. This is how many hands it takes to wield them. Some weapons can be used both one or two-handed. These weapons usually have an added bonus when used with 2 hands. Unarmed weapons do not have grips since they are literally a part of your character. Every weapon has a rarity and price as well, and I might do a video on Rokugan's economy, but this video is about combat, so I'm gonna skip that for now. Yell at me in the comments if you absolutely need an economy video. Lastly, we have weapon qualities. There's a great deal of these, so I'm gonna just give the highlights and I'm gonna do it at blazing speed. Here we Go! Ceremonial, it's your uniform. -1 TN to know that stuff is yours. Concealable, you can hide it on you. TN3 design or smithing air check to see it. Cumbersome, it don't fit good. If you move this turn, +1 TN to attack. Also, in cumbersome armor, +1 TN to maneuver action. We covered that last video. Damage, it don't work well. +1 TN to use it, that includes weapons. Armor loses 2 to all resistances. If it gets damaged again, boom, destroyed. Destroyed, it's done broke. Maybe you can repair it, otherwise throw it away. Durable, it lasts. If a durable item becomes damaged, instead it loses the durable trait. Forbidden, it's taboo or illegal. You use it in public, lose 3 glory. Mundane, it's ordinary. Uses the keyword for some techniques, otherwise it does absolutely nothing. Prepare, you must take a support action called prepare item before each use of this item to load it. Note that regular bows can be loaded and fired in a single strike action. The only weapon in the core rules that needs to be prepared is the Oyumi crossbow. Razor edged, very sharp but also brittle. If you succeed at an attack but the damage is reduced to 0, the weapon becomes damaged. Also, you can increase the deadliness of this weapon by 1 for every opportunity spent this way. Lastly, it causes the bleeding condition on some critical strike. Resplendent, it's pretty. When you gain glory, gain 1 more if you're using the item. Sacred, it's holy, yo. Probably made of jade. If an otherworldly being makes an attack or scheme action while you got this thing, their TN increases by 1. Also, if you become inflicted, damage a sacred item you're holding instead. Lastly, you ignore all resistances of both otherworldly and tainted dudes using that weapon. So, you can slice through them like a hot knife through zombies. Snaring, your weapon grabs onto your opponent. If you spend opportunity equal to your target's vigilance, they gained the immobilized condition. Subtle, this item is secretive. +1 TN to analyze it. Unholy, it's a devil sword, probably made of obsidian. A character critically struck by the weapon becomes afflicted. If you used it in a scene, at the end of the scene, you become afflicted. Lastly, ignore all resistances of otherworldly beings. War gear, it makes you look like you want to throw down. If you're wearing a war gear item and give someone strife, hey, give them 1 more.
Strikes.
The strike is the default attack action used to hit your opponent. But a character may have a attack action technique that does something similar but a little different. Since we just want to go over the basics, we'll be concentrating on strikes, but many of the other attack actions use the same formula. When you want to hit another character or object with your weapon, make sure the weapon is readied in your hand. If not, you'll need to take an action to pull it out. Make sure you're also at the correct range. When all this is lined up, you can now make a TN2 martial arts melee ranged or unarmed check using the character's stance as the ring. If you succeed, the target takes physical damage equal to your weapon's base damage plus bonus successes. If the character has physical resistance, which is usually in the form of armor, they can reduce the damage by their physical resistance rating. This all requires a bit of parsing, so let me explain. First, let's talk about damage. When you damage someone, you're not actually wounding them. Instead, they are taking fatigue points equal to the damage. These fatigue points are how the opposing character defends themselves. This defense happens automatically and can only be lowered by the use of a void point or if they are incapacitated. If their fatigue points exceeds their endurance, they become incapacitated, which isn't a wound either. So yeah, the word strike and damage, they're all lies. Lies from the bitter pit of Jigoku. So the question remains, how do you wound someone? The answer is a critical strike, which is another misnomer, as a strike is literally the act of hitting someone. A critical strike is an actual strike. It should be called actual strike. There are many ways to perform a critical strike, but these are the 2 main ways. The first is by spending 2 opportunity when making a successful strike. If your opponent is on Earth stance, you can't use this opportunity. Keep in mind, this is only available to strike actions. If you're using a technique that is also an attack, critical strike opportunity may not be available to you. Secondly, when your opponent is incapacitated and you succeed at a strike action, if they would take any damage, instead, you inflict a critical strike. This is due to the character not being able to defend. There is some confusion around this rule, so let me set the record straight. The incapacitated condition is applied only after a character suffers fatigue damage, not during the act of taking the damage. This means that if a character has an endurance of 8 and they take 12 points of damage, they take all 12 fatigue, and only after that do they become incapacitated. This means they do not take a critical strike, even though the damage exceeded their endurance. But the next successful attack they suffer will critically strike, unless they can get rid of their incapacitated condition or reduce that attack's damage to 0. Another thing to note is that some techniques give fatigue. This is different from defending against damage, since incapacitated strictly states that you cannot defend. You can take fatigue points while incapacitated as long as they don't come from damaged sources. That's right, there's no limit to the amount of fatigue a character can take. Lastly, if you are incapacitated and do take a critical strike, your character falls unconscious along with any other effects of that critical strike. There are techniques that can also inflict critical strikes, and lastly, a character can spend a void to stop defending and just take a critical strike instead of taking the fatigue damage. Once we know that a critical strike happened, we can now resolve it, which is its own rigmarole. Critical strikes have a severity, which is usually equal to the weapon's deadliness. Falling, exposure to elements, wicked cool spells, they all have their own deadliness as well. If the weapon used has the razored edge quality, the attacker can spend extra opportunity to increase the weapon's deadliness for this attack. There are also techniques like striking as fire that can do similar things, and critical strikes against unconscious characters gain plus 10 deadliness. But otherwise, a weapon's deadliness is what it is. The target of an attack then must make a TN1 fitness check using the ring of their current stance. That said, this check is not part of an action, it's a resistance. So if a character is incapacitated or even unconscious, they still get to make this roll. The TN is subject to modifiers, so if a character is already wounded in that ring, it could make the TN that much more difficult. If the character succeeds, they reduce the severity of the strike by 1. Plus 1 for every bonus success, so get as many successes as possible. If a player does not like the result of their fitness check, they can perform a shattering parry, once per game session or when the character spends a void. The rule in the book states both things, and in wildly different places of the book, it's never clarified which one is correct. I mean, maybe both? A character may re-roll their fitness check, taking the new roll. This gives the weapon they are using the damage condition. If the character was unarmed, it could give them a scar disadvantage, which is the same thing as a critical hit, so, don't do that, it's stupid. Once you have the final severity, check it against this chart. Close call, the character's armor or clothes gain the damage quality. If they're naked, no effect. A reminder, if a character is incapacitated and receives a close call, they are still knocked unconscious. Flesh wound, the character is lightly wounded in the ring they were using to defend. Wounds affect rings separately, yes. If the wounding weapon is razored edge, the character is also bleeding. If the character is already lightly wounded in that ring, they become severely wounded instead. Debilitating gash. The character is severely wounded in the ring they were using to defend. Again, if the weapon is razored edged, then bleeding is applied. If they are already lightly or severely wounded in that ring, they instead gain a permanent injury. Permanent injury. The character gains the bleeding condition no matter what. They gain a scar disadvantage that is dependent on the ring they were using to defend. Maiming blow. The character is bleeding. Then they gain a different, harsher scar disadvantage related to the ring they were using to defend. Agonizing death. The character becomes severely wounded in the ring they were using to defend. Remember that if they were already severely wounded in that ring, they get a permanent injury instead. They also are bleeding and gain the condition dying 3 rounds, which gives them 4 rounds to get medical attention or get dead. Swift end. The character is severely wounded with all that entails. They are bleeding now and dying 1 round, which gives them 2 rounds left in this mortal coil. Instant death. The character is dead. Here's a new character sheet. Take it.
Conditions.
Conditions are status effects imposed on characters. Each condition has an effect and a way it can be removed. Here's a list of all of them in the core rules. I could go over all of them one by one, but ain't nobody got time for that. Instead, I'm going to touch on the ones used most in combat and try and clear up some misunderstandings. First up, incapacitated. Yeah, I'm going a bit out of order, but you need to understand this condition before I explain some of the others. A character usually becomes incapacitated when their fatigue exceeds their endurance, and it's removed when their fatigue is at least equal to their endurance or lower. Incapacitated characters cannot perform actions that require checks and cannot defend. They can take actions that don't require checks, like maneuver, assist, calming breath, and can also make checks that are not connected to actions like resisting critical strikes. Because they can't defend, anytime they take damage, they instead take a critical hit. But they can still gain fatigue if it does not come from a damage source. If an incapacitated character takes a critical hit, they also suffer the unconscious condition. Unconscious characters cannot move or perform any actions. They can still make checks to resist effects, for example, critical strike. They cannot defend either, which really sucks because if they do take a critical strike, the severity increases by +10. Characters can remove the unconscious condition due to loud noises, if they suffer harm like a critical strike, or other things that would reasonably rouse them. Also, a character may spend a void to instantly wake up, as if they supernaturally knew an attack was coming. Basically a legal way to metagame. Of course, a character can also remove it in a couple of hours when they wake up naturally. There are two wounded conditions, lightly and severely. They affect specific rings that are determined when the condition is applied, usually to the ring of the character's current stance. Each ring does correspond to a different body part, and while this doesn't add extra mechanics, it can add to the drama. Light wounds give the character +1 TNs to all checks involving that ring, and severely wounded characters gain +3 to the TN. Yes, you can change stances to avoid the penalties. If you are lightly wounded and get another light wound in that same ring, it turns into a severe wound. If you are severely wounded and get any type of wound to the same ring, the character takes a severity 8 critical strike that they instantly fail. So basically, take a permanent injury. Why they say severity 8, blah blah blah, I guess it has to do with any techniques or school ability that allows a character to mess with that sort of thing, but for most purposes, it's just a permanent injury. Take a permanent injury. To remove this condition, a character can get medical attention. TN4 Medicine Water Check as a downtime activity. A successful check can remove a light wound or reduce a severe wound down to light, but it can only be done once per week, succeed or fail, so make sure you get the right treatment the first time. Secondly, you can sleep it off. After a week of bed rest, you can make a TN3 fitness check in the wounded ring, but you get to ignore your wounded penalty, so that's nice. If you succeed, it has the same effect as medical attention. Dying is a condition a character can get, sure. Dying always has an amount of rounds associated with it. Once the number of rounds is up, the character gets one more turn before they die. So dying 3 rounds actually gives you a 4th round. You can save any dying character with a TN4 Medicine Air check as a support action. But if you fail, the amount of rounds before death is reduced by the shortfall. So be careful. Lastly, bleeding, which is probably the most confusing status condition of them all. It says, when a bleeding character makes a check, they suffer physical damage equal to the strife symbols on their kept dice, ignoring their resistances. Okay, all well and good so far. Then, each time damage inflicted this way causes the character to suffer a critical strike, the severity of the critical strike is treated as being equal to the character's current fatigue. This second part, in the way I just read it, does nothing, or it instantly kills you. Let me explain. Bleeding does damage when you roll dice and keep strife. Damage causes critical strikes when a character is incapacitated. Incapacitated characters cannot take actions that have checks, i.e. roll dice. So, when does bleeding cause a character to take a critical strike? When rolling to resist an effect like a critical strike? If you take a critical strike while incapacitated and bleeding, and then you keep a die with strife, do you take another critical strike? Do you do the same thing and take more and more critical strikes? Will you be able to take infinite critical strikes? This is how I run this rule. When a bleeding character takes an action that requires a check, they suffer physical damage equal to the strife symbols on their kept dice, ignoring their resistances. Every time a character takes damage in this way, it causes them to suffer a critical strike equal to their current fatigue. I don't know if this is the way the designers intended it to be used, but for me, this solves the problem of infinite critical strikes and makes every action the character takes a nail-biter full of sacrifice to do what needs to be done. This is one of the many rules that are confusing and just plain broken in this game, which leads me to my favorite segment, Criticism Corner! Yay! It's not just the confusing terminology. I mean, it is, but that's just a small part of the steep learning curve here. You roll to hit, you expect to hit the enemy. Look, if you succeed at your roll and the GM then says he deftly deflects your blade and rolls out of the way, he takes 5 fatigue, that just makes you feel like crap as a player. What the hell happened to your success? It's like saying you succeed at your composition check to write a poem, but then the paper bursts into flames. Then you add this extra layer of critical strikes on top of it all, where you calculate the deadliness, and then your defender has to roll, and you check against a chart to see how bad it is. It's a lot of a lot. I get the game is trying to be cinematic, with parrying and dodges, and then at the right moment that critical strike that turns the battle. But then, most weapons' deadliness don't exceed 5. And that will barely get you a severe wound, and that's if the target doesn't reduce the severity. Many a combat I have run are just the players and NPCs taking close call after close call until everyone is fighting naked and bold. Now, there are rules for grittier games, which increases all weapon deadliness by 4, which I do like, but then it kills anyone with the bleeding condition at the end of a scene unless they spend Void, which is just unfair. Finally, there's the fact that a character only takes fatigue on defense and not attack. Have you ever heard of the rope-a-dope? It's a boxing technique created by Muhammad Ali to stay on the defense and have the other fighter tire themselves out attacking. Once his opponent was all tuckered out, he'd go on the offense and bring them down. Something to think about. Hey, what are you doing? What? I'm busy. This place, it's a frickin' sty. Would you start cleaning, please? Well, what have you been doing? Me? I've been making this video. Wait, this video? Yeah, the video that we're in right now. Okay, tell you what. I challenge you to a duel. You win, I'll clean up. Oh, you want a duel, huh? All right, I'm ready to duel. Come on. Woo! Isn't this fun? When you said duel, I thought I was going to get to hurt you. Hi there, and welcome to the L5R Dojo. My name is Corey. Duels have always been a core part of Legend of the Five Rings. You know, that tabletop role-playing game we've been talking about for 7 episodes. Well, the current version of the game is no exception. When 2 people have a spat, and they want to duke it out, or even if they're just sparring or having sport of it, they can use the dueling rules. Now, dueling can become really great and engaging scenes where a character can really shine, but there are some drawbacks. Duels usually involve only one PC and an NPC. Well, you could have 2 PCs involved, but someone is almost always going to come away from that scenario bitter. Game Masters. Come here for a second, Game Masters. While it might be fun to have your players spar with each other using these rules, you should really try and steer them away from confronting each other in a serious duel, unless you want your game to break down. The dueling rules try to be broad, so they can encompass many kinds of duels, from Iijitsu fast draw swordsmanship to magical Shugenja battles, to playing a game of dice at the local sake house. But before a duel can even begin, some social rules need to be followed. After all, etiquette is very important in Rokugan.
Challenge.
The official way to start a duel in the current version of L5R is that 2 parties simply agree to dueling within the conventions of their clan, which the book is sparse on details. There are a few examples about Crane and Crab and Unicorn, but other than that, it's up to the players and the GM to suss out the details. The only really hard rule is that if characters cannot agree about the details of the duel, it's up to the Lord of the Land or the Lord of the character with the highest status. By making the rules of establishing a duel vague, it allows the GM to contrive any reason to insert a duel into their game. If a game master doesn't want 2 people to duel, they can simply make up an excuse why they can't. For example, the differences in their status are too vast, or the land of the PCs that they're currently in is observing a holiday in which no duels can be issued. All that said, players and GMs alike love consistency and societal rules that make a certain amount of sense. Now, some of these are my own, developed with my experiences with the game, and others come from previous editions of the game, but I want to make it clear that all of these ideas I'm about to present are strictly
off the book, see?
Magistrates who make accusations and arrest in their official duty should probably be immune to challenges of duels. It would be rather hard for any sort of law and order to get done when your magistrates are in duels every day, and it would be a quite deadly occupation at that. Anyone challenging a magistrate for doing their duty would seem villainous indeed and forfeit glory as a major loss. A character cannot challenge their direct lord. Your character has sworn oaths to their lord, and by extension, the retainers that are above you in rank. Challenging that lord can and should be dismissed out of hand, and makes the character look petty indeed. Anyone issuing a challenge to their superiors should forfeit honor as a massive breach. The correct way to protest your lord is ritual suicide, but that presents its own problems. It's outside the scope of this video. A character should not be able to challenge another in a higher caste than them. Buke can ignore challenges from G-Samurai, G-Samurai can ignore challenges from Hymen, Hymen can ignore challenges from Burakumin. In fact, those of higher castes can simply have those people arrested or even killed for issuing the challenge. All that said, it takes a certain amount of bravery to try and challenge above one's class. So there is no honor or glory loss for doing so, just the threat of the loss of freedom or life. Like every good rule in society, there are exceptions, and these are based on glory and honor. If a person is exceptionally glorious or exceptionally honorable, it might look bad on any person if they don't accept the challenge, no matter their station. For example, the greatest Hymen Go player challenges a samurai to a game of Go, the samurai would look cowardly for not accepting the game despite their differences in caste. Likewise, a challenge from a person with a low honor or glory may be dismissed by anyone out of hand because such a disreputable person should not be given the time of day. Of course, it's not only the GM's game, but the PCs as well, so anyone can try and challenge anyone else, and shouldn't be yelled down for this behavior. Strange stuff happens in all societies, and conventions are broken all the time. A daimyo can certainly spar with their favorite Hymen, despite the gossip he might receive about it. The challenge itself can be a fertile ground to explore the culture of Rokugan. But remember, issuing the challenge is only part of it. There are terms to be set, and these include the type of duel, the conditions of the victory, and where that duel takes place. The most common and traditional form of duel is Iijitsu, and is the form all duels default to. Iijitsu is the art of the quick draw, where two opponents stare each other down as tension builds, and at the right moment, when they think their opponent has succumbed to the pressure of the tension, the combatants attempt to strike each other, hoping to draw their sword faster than the other. Iijitsu is considered a high art, and there are many who love a more rough and tumble sort of duel. The Warriors duel is basically a knockdown, drag-out fight between two opponents using whatever weapons or techniques they choose. Sometimes these fights are still regulated to just swords, rather than any weapon you want, and these duels are called Kenjutsu duels, while strictly hand-to-hand fights are called Jujitsu. Shugenja have their own form of dueling, the Wizards duel. It's called Taryujai, where they cast invocations at each other. Sometimes they also allow physical strikes in the duel, like in Crab and Scorpion lands. There are many other types of duels that the book doesn't explicitly cover. These are wrestling matches, weapon skill challenges, sarane, the rhetoric duel of courtiers, games of dice or cards, even foot races. These can all be covered in one-roll duels, which I'll talk about later in this video. But if you want a more comprehensive rule set for wrestling or games of chance, I've created a dynamic experience using my own rules, and you can find that in the link in the description. Next is the winning condition. The most extreme of this is the duel to the death. This is reserved for physical fights, like an Iijitsu or Warriors duel. Typically, duels to the death must be approved by each of the participants' lord, but these types of duels can easily happen on the battlefield or in the heat of the moment. Battlefield duels to the death can be expected due to the nature of war, but a heat of the moment duel to the death? Well, that can lead to a blood feud. Duels to incapacitation. Duels to incapacitation means the duel proceeds until one of the characters' fatigue exceeds their endurance, giving them the incapacitated condition. I hate that word incapacitated. Warrior duels and Taryuji are usually fought to this condition. Iijitsu duels can also be fought to first strike or first blood. First strike means the first character to inflict any critical hit on their opponent wins. First blood is when the critical strike exceeds 5 or more, which results in a debilitating gash. This covers the winning conditions as stated in the book, but there are others, such as ring outs for wrestling matches, or winning a hand of cards, or even having the largest cut for a test of stone. Duels can also be determined by an impartial judge or set of judges on criteria. They can even be set by the roar of a crowd. When determining who won by this standard, there is this chart for gaining points. In fact, this chart should always be used in any duel to assess how much glory is awarded to either player for participating in the duel. The winner of a duel may also gain additional reward if the duel was predicated on some predefined goal. For example, a person dueling for their honor may gain exoneration and even apology by the defeated. A competition may have a prize or status gain, or both. A gambling match will have a monetary reward. The last thing that needs to be settled is time, location, and who exactly will participate. There can be many reasons for duels not to take place for long periods of time. For example, a pregnant woman may wish to wait until she is no longer carrying a child before they may duel. A character may be on a special quest, or someone else may hold their life and it needs to be released before they can duel. It is recommended that PC duels happen quickly to resolve the drama, but two NPCs that are waiting on a duel yet see each other often can be the impetus for a good plot. Many would want a spiritual cleansing before a duel to the death, which might realistically take a week, but I recommend not being realistic here, as spiritual cleansing could take a character out of play. Err on the side of storytelling always. Locations are probably always the easiest thing to decide. Be creative with it, be epic, and create interesting stages for a duel. Bridges at sunset, the Master's Dojo, the Championship Ring, the Daimyo's Yacht. The possibilities are endless. Duels can draw a large crowd, but sometimes a private duel on a beach can be just as exciting. Now I'd like to talk about participants, namely the idea of champions, or people who take the place of the person dueling in their name. There are no hard and fast rules for champions, but I'd like to tell you how I like to rule it in my game. Lords can have any of their subjects stand in for them during a duel. Many times this is how they're able to skirt the ramifications of a duel. If an underling is wounded or killed protecting their lord, so be it, they did their duty. The second type of champion is a person who stands in for an unskilled opponent. For example, if a courtier or shugenja is challenged to a sword fight, it's reasonable that a yojimbo, a bodyguard, stands in for them. A warrior would look weak if they call in a champion for a physical duel, just as a shugenja would look weak for calling in a champion on a Taryuji. Any character doing so should have a major loss of glory, and maybe browbeat into giving up the champion.
One-roll duels.
A typical duel has a tension that rises every round until a final strike is delivered. This is fine and well for combatants in a physical altercation, but for everything else, there's the optional one-roll duels. One-roll duels are just that. Two players involved take their dice pool for the relevant ring and skill, take into account the terrain, advantages, disadvantages, anything they can leverage to their advantage, and then make a single attack roll at TN1, adjusted for wound, stance, or anything else. The player that makes the roll with the most bonus successes wins the duel, or has the least shortfall if neither of them make their TN. If weapons are involved, the winning character inflicts a critical hit with double the deadliness, plus bonus successes to their opponent. Their opponent defends as normal. If characters are tied for bonus successes, then it's a karmic strike, both hitting each other and inflicting the critical strike just as I described. After the strike is resisted, the character with the least grievous wound wins. If the wounds are the same, then the duel is a draw. Why would a GM want to use these rules? Well, first is if the type of duel doesn't fit Iijitsu, Warriors Duel, or the Shugenja Duel, then the GM can quickly default to a one-roll duel. For example, if the duel is a wrestling match and the GM doesn't have my handy guide to alternative duels, then they may just want to use a one-roll duel instead. Duels can also take up a good deal of time, and since only one player is usually involved, it can lead to a game where the other players might get bored while the dueler has the spotlight. Or if there's a time crunch and a one-roll duel can speed the game along so everyone can get as much roleplay in as they can. Or maybe a GM just doesn't like the dynamic dueling rules. Look, I don't know your life, you do you!
Focus.
Now that all that's out of the way, let's talk about what I call the dynamic duel. This is the normal way duels are presented in the game. Each player will use their focus value and then roll a TN1 meditation roll. Anyone succeeding in that roll will add 1 to their focus plus 1 for every bonus success, and this number will become their initiative. This can be further modified by the stare down. At the beginning of each turn, the stare down occurs. Stare downs are where the tension of the duel rises. This is described in the book as a warrior's sense becoming elevated. I like to say that a warrior begins to run scenarios in their minds on how they intend to attack or defend in order to win the battle, second-guessing themselves, and their anxiety over their win or loss builds. However you like to describe a stare down, the end result is the same: strife. Each character in the duel gains an amount of strife equal to the rounds they are in. In the first round of the duel, each character gains 1 strife, but in the second round of the duel, they will gain 2 more strife, and so on and so on. After the strife gain, if each character is not compromised, they may now secretly bid additional strife. They reveal that number at the same time and gain that amount of strife, but they also add that number to their initiative until the end of the round. Either player may bid 0, of course. Initiative scores then revert to their original value at the end of the round. Once initiative totals are finalized for that round, the player with the highest initiative goes first. On their turn, they may choose a stance, move, and take an action. I covered stances in a previous video, but Mr. Wallscroll can give you a quick review. Remember, narrate your stance. A character on fire stance may grind their teeth or grip their weapon with white knuckles, while a character on earth stance may be low to the ground or holding their weapon defensively. Go forth and be epic. Movement in a duel may not matter that much. The book states that mechanically all duels start at range 2, but then explains that on their turn a character can move pretty much wherever they wish as long as the game master allows it. Much of the time, movement won't matter, but sometimes it will. For example, when I ran Sin of Regret, one of my players in a duel described how he moved to the edge of the crowd, setting up for a strike when their opponent closed distance.
And I move. I can still move.
You can move. You can move wherever you want, actually. There's no, like, range
and I
stance or
move.
anything.
I move far enough away from her to force her to have to come to me.
Okay. When you backed away from her towards the edge of, like, the dueling area, I assume, right? You're no longer in the center, you're in the edge.
Yeah.
Which characters do you think you have retreated next to?
So I imagine that I'm still standing where I started and just backed up straight. So whoever was on my side, being maybe everybody in the group and maybe Mia Shinako.
But when the player struck, his opponent had a technique that allowed her to deflect the blow into another character within range. Since the player described he moved close to the crowd, he accidentally killed a very important bystander when that blow was deflected, causing the duel to immediately halt.
All right. I have a technique, and you are going to be very upset.
Then
School of the Wolf. Once per round, when an attack action targeting the Ronin succeeds, the Ronin may suffer 3 strife and change the target to another character.
19, 20, 21.
21.
Deadliness 21.
21. This might be instant death for the character.
Oh no.
Ayumi beheads Mia Shinako.
Oh. Ooh.
Yeah, this is the situation where the referee should go, no! Disqualified!
Now let's talk about some duel actions. Put up the list. These are the things each character can do in a round. Remember, a character can take only 1 action per round unless on water stance. First up, Calming Breath. I've covered this action in other videos, so I won't spend any more time on it other to say that this is the primary way to recover in a duel. Center is a way to store your good dice for use later. As the character begins to outthink their opponent, they may create conditions for their next move. Think of it as setting up your opponent, like how you can think many moves ahead in chess. This action can only be used on void stance, so make sure your character is on it. Choose a skill and roll a number of skill dice equal to your ranks in that skill. Do not activate any signs on those dice. Exploding dice do not explode. Strife dice do not add strife. At least, they don't do that yet. After those dice are rolled, the player can take any number of them and then store them in reserve, never changing their top face. For example, you can keep an explosive success die in reserve as if it was rolled. Then, the next time you roll that skill, you can replace any number of dice with that reserve die. This happens after you have already rolled the skill check in question, so you can pick up a bum die and then replace it with your better reserve dice. You can even replace ring dice with skill dice that were in reserve. A note, you cannot keep more dice in reserve than your skill rank. Why does this need clarification if you're just rolling skill dice? Well, void points. You can still spend a void to roll an extra ring die with your center action. If the ring die is kept in reserve, it can replace a skill die or a ring die the next time that skill is rolled. And yes, it must be the next time the skill is rolled. These reserve dice cannot be held indefinitely for some future roll. Also, and this is not in the book, but it makes sense to me, it can't be held in reserve after the duel is ended. Reserve dice are lost when the scene ends. Predict helps you to strife your opponent out. You literally secretly predict the stance your opponent will be on when their turn starts. If you choose correctly, your opponent gains 4 strife and must choose a different stance. While there is only a 1 in 5 chance of picking the correct stance, if you can figure it out, you'll be that much closer to your finishing blow. So there's a huge benefit to it. You must announce that you are predicting, so your opponent does know that you are trying to guess their next stance. But since the prediction itself is secret, it can be a great way to add some drama to a duel. Prepare item is another one already discussed in previous videos. Remember, drawing a weapon is considered an action. So unless it's an Iijitsu strike, which is drawing and striking in a single motion, you can only do the draw. You can always perform a unique action as long as it's within the rules of the duel. If it's not, you may suffer honor or glory losses, or even forfeit the duel. So be aware, talk it over with the game master, and be fair. Strike is an action I devoted an entire video to. But there's something very important to talk about with this action, namely that you can't always use it without breaking the rules. For example, in some instances of Tarugi, it's forbidden to strike. And you certainly cannot, or rather shouldn't, take a strike during a game of chance or during a sadane. But most importantly, you cannot use the strike action in a Iijitsu duel until the finishing blow. Look, I know what it says in the book. Each warrior must begin with their blaze sheath, drawing them no earlier than their first turn. This implies you can draw your weapon first turn and then strike. But this is not within the spirit of an Iijitsu duel, in my opinion. Swords must stay in their sheaths until a finishing blow is dealt. After that blow, if the victory condition is not achieved, it is then transformed into a warrior's duel, and strike actions can be used whenever you like. Finishing blows are special attack actions that I'll go into more detail soon enough, but it can be the primary way to bring a duel to a close. Iijitsu duels are supposed to be one-strike, one-win duels. I strongly believe that strikes cannot be used during the Iijitsu period of a duel. If you support the rules as written, or if you support my own interpretation of Iijitsu duels, please sound off in the comments. I want to hear about you. I want to hear your opinion on the Iijitsu duel. Now, let's talk about those finishing blows.
Strike.
I love the idea of a finishing blow. Let me break it down for you. When a character gains enough strife to become compromised or unmasked for any reason, they lose composure. They're fighting edge, and they open themselves up to a finishing blow. Then, their opponent can interrupt anything they're doing and make an attack action against them. This can interrupt an action, interrupt the stare down, or if a character gains strife while performing a finishing blow, can interrupt another finishing blow.
A finishing blow is not an attack action itself, but instead allows you to choose any of the attack actions you have, including any attack techniques or even the strike action. This allows you to use any of the opportunities associated with that attack action, but damage is done differently.
If the attack action is successful, the attack does no damage. Instead, a critical hit is inflicted with double the amount of deadliness of the weapon or action, plus the number of bonus successes. For example, if this is an Iijitsu duel and the character succeeded in their finishing blow with 2 bonus successes, then they would take the one-handed deadliness of their weapon at 5, double it to 10, and then add 2 bonus successes for a total of 12 deadliness. This can be further modified by school techniques, kata, invocations, whatever the character has. The opponent may defend as normal, making a fitness check to absorb the blow, or even use a shattering parry if they have a readied weapon in their hand. A finishing blow is usually devastating and more often than not signals the end of the duel. But sometimes, even after the finishing blow, the conditions of the duel are not met. In this case, the duel continues as normal. Triggering a finishing blow does not count as unmasking. So, if that was not the cause of the finishing blow, then a character still has all of their accumulated strife. A finishing blow can only be triggered once per character per duel. So, if you were already the target of a finishing blow, you cannot be again for the rest of the duel. And that's that. That's all I know about dueling in Legend of the Five Rings. I hope this clears up a bunch of questions you have about the rules, and if it did, give this video a thumbs up.
What is this place? I seem to have like a memory or a dream. Wait, you're still here? Well, I better help you out then, right? It's time to talk about skirmishes and mass battles. Welcome to the L5R Dojo. My name's Corey. Let's jump right in. When a fight breaks out between 3 or more characters but is small enough to run on a battle map, what you got there is a skirmish. If you have hundreds of troops ready to puncture holes in the enemy, you got yourself a mass battle. Both of these are conflict scenes, but both are run differently. We're going to start with
Skirmish Basics.
Alright, I assume you watched other videos in this series. These 2 videos basically tell you how to run a skirmish. For real, go watch them and then come back, because they'll cover the skirmish actions of maneuvers and strikes. I will not be reviewing them here. Yes, those 2 actions are so complex, I devoted an entire video just to them. 2 videos just to them. So they are the most important actions of a skirmish. All characters in a skirmish need to roll their initiative. The base of their initiative value, where it starts from, is their focus value. That's only if they're ready to fight. If any of the characters are surprised or they're ambushed, they substitute their vigilance instead. You're going to add to that the result of a tactics check, TN1. And for a success, you'll add 1 plus 1 for each bonus success. If you're the narrator and have a bunch of minions, just use their focus or vigilance value for initiative without rolling dice. Otherwise, you're going to be there all day. Sure, they'll probably go last. It's not a real problem. They're minions. Remember, whatever approach your character uses on their initiative becomes their stance until their first turn. So if they're attacked before then, they will use that approach when using their defensive rolls. But stance bonuses do not apply to the initiative roll itself. Rounds start with the highest initiative value, and each character goes in turn, going all the way down to the lowest initiative value, and then a new round starts. Pretty much like every other role-playing game. Clashes can interrupt this procedure, but we'll talk about that later. Don't clog your mind with it right now. A round in the skirmish doesn't have a set amount of time, unlike other games that might say have a 6 or 10 second round. A round in L5R can be whatever length of time a GM needs for everybody to get their actions done. This may be frustrating to some people who want to know exact times for how long their invocations last, but it can be good for others who want to be able to, parlay a battle and have those good, dramatic scenes.
Skirmish actions.
What can a character do in a round? Usually, one action plus a repositioning. But you can get a second action on water stance. We've covered that before. Positioning can be done before or after an action, but only once per turn. This allows your character to move one range band. This is not considered an action to do, so it can be combined with actions that have the movement keyword. There are a few actions I covered in Intrigue and Duel conflicts. These are assist, prepare items, and calming breath. That's right, pulling out a weapon and putting it away is considered an action unless you're doing an Iijitsu technique. It's pretty great that a bunch of this work for these actions are already covered in other videos. It's almost as if I don't need a dedicated skirmish video. So the guard action is an interesting action. If the person you wish to guard is within weapons range of your readied weapon, you can increase the TN of any attack action against them. You've guarded them from attacks. This can be done with a melee or a ranged weapon. How can you do this in some circumstances might be a stretch, as you somehow guard a person from being shot with an arrow with your throwing knife who's outside of the range of your throwing knife. Technically within the rules, but how you want to describe that, how it happens, it might stretch believability. Also, it never says how much ammunition is expended when using this technique with a range action. Only that a character could fire arrows to harry an attacker. Look, I'm all for simple rules, and this one's pretty good and pretty simple, but it just needs a little bit of cleaning up, just a touch. Wait is your hold action. It works just like readying an action in other games. It gives you an if-then statement. For example, if the enemy comes within range, I shoot them with an arrow. If someone tries to tickle you, you give them a big wet kiss. Pretty handy if you know something's coming. The only limitation is that there's no movement actions that can be part of your wait. And it only lasts until the end of round, not until your next turn. If the triggering event doesn't occur, you still get to take an action at the end of the round. So even if your bet of the if-then didn't pay off, you don't lose the action. Lastly, there's the challenge action, which may result in a clash. This is a confusing one, and it's kind of weird, and it gives me a bit of a headache. You know how I like simple things? Not here. Basically, it's a mini duel inside a skirmish, but it happens at the end of the round, outside of normal turns, and doesn't have to last for more than one turn, but should? So how does it work? The challenger yells a challenge to the target up to 5 range bands away. Yep, it can be like a half a field away. Then, it makes the easiest of easy TN1 command checks. If successful, then the target decides if they want to accept or decline. If they decline, they lose glory equal to the challenger's ranks in command, plus bonus successes on the command check. And all of their allies who have glory less than the challenger gains 2 strife. Okay. But there's more. Then, the challenger gets a void point as well. Also, the GM has to give them $100 and use of their car for the rest of the week. It's in the book. If the target accepts, both characters must stake 10 glory and 5 honor, which they will forfeit if they do anything to sabotage the duel, including taking an attack or scheme action before the clash starts at the end of the round. Now, we go back to the skirmish as normal, going through everyone's action until the end of the round. During this time, if another outside character messes with the clash, for example, attacking one of the 2 duelists or giving one of the 2 duelists a magical advantage, they lose 10 honor. Another character can legally cut in and replace one of the 2 duelists by making their own challenge to one of those 2 duelists. But this could allow a bunch of characters to start challenging all of the targets that are involved in a weird, contest of shouted challenges until the end of the round. And if somebody else's challenge works after you did a challenge, theirs usurps yours, and you can't, like, say, no, I was challenged third. Okay, so you finally made it to the end of the round. And there may or may not be the same two initial combatants, but they're on two, and you're ready to go. This works like a mini duel. And oh, look, there, I've made a video about duels that I already showed you to go review. So, moving on, just like a duel, there are three phases: the stare down, the action phase, and the phase where you determine a winner. So, let's go through those, right? So the stare down of a clash works just like the stare down of the duel. Both combatants can bid strife to increase the initiative value for just this part of the clash. It doesn't affect your initiative value for the rest of the skirmish. And then you gain strife equal to the number of the rounds the clash has gone on for. All right, just like a regular duel. Just like a duel, both characters take an action in that initiative order. It isn't explicitly stated, but I tend to allow dual conflict actions to be used here since that makes sense. Remember, if at any time one of the duelists becomes compromised or unmasked, a finishing blow is triggered, and it works just like the finishing blow from the duel, interrupting the current action to take effect. Then, once both characters have had their action, if any duelist is incapacitated, unconscious, or dying, the other wins. Every character on the loser's team gets 3 strife, and the winner's team gets high fives. If neither are incapacitated, unconscious, or dying after they've had their actions, then either duelist may simply leave the clash with no penalty. The clash doesn't have a winner or loser, and life goes on. Birds sing, children play, and nobody in the clash is really very satisfied. If both combatants want to continue, they may, in which case they both skip their regular turns. Unless, of course, somebody interrupts the clash this round with their own challenge, in which case the new combatant takes the place. But since this is technically the same clash, the stare down gives that person not one, but the number of rounds that the clash has gone on with in strife. That's how that works. It's, like I said, this is a confusing thing. And that's it. That's everything you need to know about running a skirmish. They end when one side can no longer fight due to surrendering, running away, or just straight up being beat so hard they're down or dead.
Mass battle basics.
A mass battle is for 2 armies, not for the PCs alone versus an army. If I was doing that, I'd just probably make that a narrative theme punctuated by the pivotal skirmishes as they make their way through. That's not what this is about. Since mass battles are dependent on armies, the first thing you need to do is understand what makes up an army. And for that, we need to have an army character sheet. The 2 biggest factors in an army is their strength and discipline. The strength rating is basically your army's hit points, and their discipline is their morale. Instead of damage, an army does attrition damage, which is turned into casualty points. I don't know why they called these all different things, just makes it more complicated. They should just be like, an army does damage to your strength. If your casualty points exceeds your army's strength, it is routed and you are defeated. When routed, all PCs and adversary NPCs that are part of the army that is routed take a critical strike with severity 12. So this could kill you. Or they don't, and the narrator can just narrate what happens to them, like being taken captive or left for dead or teleported to a distant realm. It's your game. Do what you want. It's not like there's rules in a book that I'm trying to explain to make sure instead of strife, an army takes panic. If an army's panic exceeds their discipline, then the army's morale collapses and it disperses, unable to fight. The battle is lost, but everyone escapes.
Commanders and leaders.
First, give your army a commander. It could be a PC or an NPC. They will be the only ones rolling initiative, which is a command roll, and they will determine what the objective is for each round. Yes, This works a bit like an intrigue conflict in that there will be objectives and momentum points. If a commander dies, the army gains 10 panic, and the person with the next highest status takes charge, or maybe the PCs just bicker about it for a while. Now, make each PC and major NPC a leader and give them a cohort. Yes, commanders and leaders are different. Commanders command an army, leaders lead a cohort. Don't confuse them like I did in an earlier draft of this script. A commander is supposed to dictate who exactly is a leader and how many cohorts there are. But leaving a PC out of a leadership position when they want one is what we call a Richard move, and is one of the many reasons a player might leave your game. Don't be a Richard. A cohort is a part of an army, but they don't say how big, so it's as big as it needs to be. They can have a specialization or not. If it is specialized, it might have like special rules or a cool ability, like cavalry or a stealth advantage. Cohorts don't have an army sheet, but rather, when they take damage, it is done to the main army on the main army sheet. If and when they take casualties, they can be reinforced from the main army as needed, between rounds, because rounds are pretty long in a conflict like this. But if they take casualties equal to 1/4 or greater the total of an army's strength, the narrator can rule that the cohort is destroyed. Now, get a map and sketch up some terrain features and fortifications. This will be a great way to track where your cohorts are and what they're doing. Also, fortifications can act like army armor, reducing attrition damage. Different terrains will also change how your army reacts. Unless an army is stopped by something, they can reasonably move anywhere on the map, as rounds and mass battles take minutes to hours to perform, kind of like a downtime activity. It's why you can also always reinforce your cohort. But if you have this handy book, you can turn your battle maps into zones, and moving from zone to zone uses the march action. TN3 command check that moves you to an adjacent zone, plus one more zone for every 3 bonus successes. This book is alright for some extra goodies when mass battles are concerned, with detailed instructions on building your army, including what types of troops are in your army, what kind of training they have, and how to maintain that army, and what happens to an army when it's done being an army. There are new terrain types for both mass battles and skirmishes to spice up all of your encounters. But we are covering the basics here. If you want a comprehensive review of Field of Victory, raise your voice. Or, bribe me with cash on my Patreon. We got our armies ready. We got our commanders and leaders. It's time to smash them together like 5-year-olds with action figures.
Strategic objectives.
Commanders roll their initiatives. TN1 command check. Then each commander chooses their strategic objective. At least, that's what the book says to do. This is obviously a stupid idea because we were playing a cooperative role-playing game. Cooperative. So instead, all the players should get together and decide which objective they think is best. Just being told what to do, that can be okay for players unsure of what they're doing, but taking agency away from the players and bringing down orders from on high, or worse, letting one PC dictate to everyone else what they are doing, well, this is a recipe for disaster and will tank your game. Let everyone discuss and agree on the strategic objective together, and then use the commander position to adjudicate arguments or indecisions. If a PC abuses their position as commander, let them know gently, take them aside and discuss it. You can even give a penalization of honor or have a higher up remove them from the position if they just can't listen to reason. It's good to remember that if you did not complete a strategic objective in the previous round, you can pick it up again, keeping your momentum points from the last round. Once an objective is complete, they cannot use the same objective for 3 rounds. A leader that completes an objective, though, gets 3 glory, But everybody else that actually helped in getting momentum points for it, they can go kick rocks. Only the last person, the person that get the last momentum point gets that 3 glory. Capturing a position is exactly what you think. You try and take control of a gate or a watchtower or any other type of entrenchment. The bigger the fortification, the harder it is to do, with the amount of momentum needed ranging from 4 to 12. When you complete it, the enemy must leave, and you can now immediately occupy that fortification. An army can gain 1 momentum point for every casualty inflicted on the enemy to complete this objective. Cutting off the head is going after the leader of a cohort or the commander themselves. Simply by attacking the cohort that the enemy leads, you gain 3 momentum points towards your goal. If an army gets the momentum points equal to or more than the difficulty value to corner the leader... Wait, how do you determine the difficulty value of a leader? Wait, if I'm targeting a PC and the narrator... Well, what's the difficulty value of the PC? Yeah, it doesn't say. You don't know how to calculate that. Nobody knows. It's a mystery. So, make it up. 6, 9, 12. That sounds good since you get 3 momentum points per attack. We'll say that, okay? So, the leader of a cohort that gets the final momentum point, they deliver a finishing blow to the enemy, just like in a duel. And their army suffers 10 panic, or 20 if it's the commander. This can be done in a clash as well, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Draw them in tries to move an enemy out of position so you can take advantage of them. You can do this if you can goad the enemy into attacking you. For example, if they accept your challenge, that is a momentum point for you. If they attack you and you take less than 3 casualties, that's a momentum point for you. If your army gets momentum points equal to the enemy commander's vigilance, you succeed and the enemy suffers 5 panic and takes double attrition in the next round. Grind them down is just a normal sortie on the battlefield, attempting to destroy as many of the enemy as you can. You gain momentum points for every casualty and win when you get enough equal to the enemy's glory plus command skill ranks. When your army succeeds, the enemy gains 10 panic. Lastly, seize victory with an exclamation point. You shouldn't be able to perform this objective without having a few others under your belt, as this is the swan song of the battle. The book suggests at least 3 other objectives be completed, but a narrator can change this if they think it's appropriate. Again, you gain momentum points equal to the casualties you inflict on the enemy. If your momentum points equal the enemy commander's focus value plus tactic skill ranks, you win the battle. Straight up win. The enemy has to retreat, and everybody in the enemy's army loses 10 honor and 10 glory, and you win, ending the mass battle. Congratulations.
Mass battle actions.
On your turn, your commander picks 1 leader to take an action. Once that action is complete, the other army picks a leader to take an action, and then returns back to your commander to pick a leader to take an action if they haven't gone this round. This goes back and forth until every leader, including the commanders, have had all of their actions for the round, and then the round is over and a new one can begin. There are 4 types of actions a leader can take: assault, challenge, rally, and reinforce. And of course, march from this other book. Challenge is just like the challenge action from a skirmish and will result in a clash if accepted. It targets a cohort's leader if in range, and any strife suffered to allies is instead taken as panic. You might say, hey, a round in a mass battle takes way longer than one in a skirmish. Do you do all of the rounds of a clash at once? Nope. By the rules as written, you only get 1 round of a clash for 1 round of a mass battle. You might think this is quite silly. Assault is how an army attacks. A leader attempts a TN2 tactics check, and if successful, does attrition damage equal to their ranks in their command skill plus bonus successes. Notice how your damage is not based on the strength of your army, but rather the skill of your leader. Rally is a support or help action. First, the leader you are attempting to rally gains assistance on their next action. Then you make a TN1 command check, and your army removes 1 panic plus 1 for every bonus success. Reinforce is the defensive action that may increase the TN to affect your cohort, just like the guard action. With a TN2 tactics check, you increase the TN of the attack actions against that cohort by 1 plus 1 for every 2 bonus successes. But it's just for 1 round, just like the guard action. You can also occupy any empty fortification or zone with this action. And that's it! Opposing cohorts take turns doing these actions every round until one of the armies collapses in a rout, morale collapse, retreat, or if there was some other goal like, destroying a magic fortress or taking down one specific character, if that was achieved, sure, the battle ends as well. Now, just like in Intrigue, everyone is supposed to roleplay their involvement with this battle, how they move and how they perform the actions, what they say, the banter, the strategy, the insults. And just like in Intrigue, I'm underwhelmed with these mass battle rules. So, you guys know what time it is. It's time for
Criticism Corner! Yay!
Look, I know criticizing the rules I'm supposed to teach you and get you excited about playing this game might turn some people off, but every game has bad points, and I point them out so you as a narrator can see the problems in your game before they can happen and change your game to account for them, either in how you present it or even if you want to homebrew it. And it's my great hope that the makers of the game will take my advice and make the next edition of the game even better. So let's get into why I dislike mass battles. First off, as you can see, there's a lot missing from these rules. Scouting and information gathering is vital in mass combat, yet these rules assume perfect knowledge of the map and the enemy. Magic users are reduced to a cohort special ability and doesn't take into account the awesome power of invocations. But these are smaller gripes. My big problem is that this reduces mass combat to an army simulator, where the PCs pick an action, roll some dice, and then just tell you to roleplay that. Then you do that every round until you win. It pulls the personality and personal touch from the combat you can get with skirmishes and duels. It's boring. And to be honest, in the time I and other narrators have performed mass combat on this channel and our sister channel, we give lip service to these rules and instead focus on what the PCs want to do personally and then just make up how we can get that done. My ninja PC wants to take a gate. He's not going to use an assault action or a challenge or any of these things. Their cohorts are going to sneak behind the enemy and silently take them out. Skullduggery rolls, poison effects, smoke bombs, all sorts of other dramatic complications. My Shugenja PC wants to use the Kami to use the Invocation Earthquake to shake a cohort. How does that affect things? Does it affect also my army? What if my courtier wants to use information they gain to embarrass an enemy leader? How much panic does that do? Should I stop and make an intrigue scene inside my mass combat battle scene? Because I will. I'll do whatever it takes to make a mass combat as epic as possible, letting the PCs do personal things that only their character can do instead of just yelling commands and orders to their army to do an action. Previous versions of the L5R game had mass battle rules as well, but it focused on cool personal scenes where the PC could capture an enemy banner, had a chance to protect a very important person or rescue a comrade in trouble, create a rivalry, or be given a special bonus from the Kami. Sure, these things only affected the players and didn't inform the larger battle in any way whatsoever. But that was the point. The game is about the PCs. not how many attrition points an army can deliver to another army. Players want their characters to feel special, and that special feeling is what's missing from these mass battle rules. Now you might say, then just use the skirmish rules. And yeah, that's kind of what I do. I'm just saying I'm leaving an entire aspect of the game out. And I find that troubling. Trust me, what makes Legend of the Five Rings special isn't being some sort of war simulator or intrigue simulator, but instead how the world and the PCs within it are all impacted as they explore, interact, and grow within it. A lesson I learned when trying to create a hex crawl exploration simulation into Legend of the Five Rings myself. Guess what? All that garbage I created, all of these rules I made about survival roles and how many hexes of movement you can do and tracking food and finding shelter, all of it distracted from the L5R experience. It didn't add to it. So I threw it all away and focused on personal character drama. And that's it. That's all I have to say on the subject. If you found this video helpful, please like it. Let YouTube know. I mean, there's algorithms. I want other people to see and know and love Legend of the Five Rings. So please do the things to make YouTube know that you love this video. This marks the end of the rules on how to play Legend of the Five Rings. But that's not to say there aren't more things to talk about, like character creation, non-player characters, economies, lore, and reviews of supplemental books. Hey, tell me what you'd like to see in the comments. And you can also buy me a coffee by joining my Patreon. I'd love you to join the Dead Unicorn Club. Come and talk to me and create more games. I'm also on Discord. I'm also on Mastodon. I wish you all the best in running your own games. So don't be afraid to go roll some dice.